2020 Land Use Commission meeting and is being held using interactive conference technology, linking video conference participants and other interested individuals of the public via the Zoom Internet Conferencing Program to comply with state and county operational directives during the COVID-19 pandemic. Members of the public are viewing the meeting via the Zoom webinar platform. For all meeting participants, I'd like to stress to everyone the importance of speaking slowly, clearly, and directly into your microphone. Before speaking, please state your name and identify yourself for the record. Also, please be aware that all meeting participants are being recorded on the digital record of the Zoom meeting. Your continued participation is your implied consent to be part of the public record of this event. If you do not wish to be part of the public record, please exit this meeting now. This Zoom conferencing technology allows the parties and each participating commissioner individual remote access to the meeting proceedings via their personal digital devices. Please note that due to matters entirely outside of our control, occasional disruptions to connectivity may occur for one or more members of the meeting at any given time. If such disruptions occur, please let us know and please be patient as we try to restore the audio-visual signals to effectively conduct business during the pandemic. I will note for all my fellow commissioners that I spent a couple hours on the red dirt on my belly underneath my house stringing an Ethernet line from my modem to hopefully remove some of the problems that I've been having with connectivity. This, sorry, that's it. Okay, so my name is Jonathan Lekeke Scheuer. I'm currently serving as the chair of the Land Use Commission along with me, Commissioners Axon, Chang, Okuda, and Wong, the LUC Executive Officer Dan Ordanker, LUC Chief Planner Scott Derrickson, Chief Clerk Riley Hakoda, our LUC's Deputy Attorney General Cindy Young, and our court reporter Jean McManus are all on Oahu. Commissioner Cabral is on Hawaii Island. Commissioner Giovanni is on Kauai, and Commissioner Ohigashi is on Maui. We currently have 8 seated commissioners of a possible 9. Our first order of business is the adoption of the July 22 through 23, 2020 minutes. Mr. Hakoda or Mr. Derrickson, has there been any written testimony on the adoption of the minutes?
This is Riley Hakoda. No comments.
Okay. If there's any members of the public who wish to testify solely on the adoption of the minutes from our July 22nd and 23rd meeting, you should use the raise hand function in the attendee software and indicate that you wish to testify on this matter. Seeing none, are there any comments or corrections on the minutes? If not, is there a motion to approve? Commissioner Cabral.
I'll make a motion to approve those minutes as presented.
Commissioner, is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Oh, I see your hand now, Commissioner Wong, sorry. Seconded by Commissioner Axon, moved by Commissioner Cabral. Is there any discussion? If not, Mr. Ordanker, would you please do a roll call vote?
Mute, Dan.
Go ahead, we're on. Yeah.
Commissioner Giovanni.
Aye.
Commissioner Wong.
Aye.
Commissioner Chang.
Yes.
Commissioner Okuda.
Yes.
Commissioner Cabral.
Yes.
Commissioner Ohigashi.
Aye.
Commissioner Axon.
Aye.
Chair Scheuer.
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Motion passes unanimously.
Okay, thank you very much. And now, Mr. Ordanker, would you continue with our next agenda item, our tentative meeting schedule?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tomorrow, we will again be meeting via Zoom to take up the DR in the island matter. And then on September 2nd, we will be hopefully still be on Zoom If not, we will be on Maui for the Sea Brewer bifurcation matter. On September 10th, continuation of the Sea Brewer bifurcation matter and the Hano Hano motion to amend. On September 23rd, we will be again on Oahu for the Hawaii Memorial Park closing. And on September 24th, we will also be on Oahu for the Halikua development motions. On October 7th, we will be continuing the Halikua development motion to amend on Oahu and the Hano Hano motion to release. On October 8th, we will again be on Oahu for the Hawaii Memorial Park matter. October 21st is currently vacant. October 22nd, that will be in Hilo, the Newton Family Trust and Newton Family Matter and the Hawaii Island Land Trust matters motion to amend. Number 4th, once again, be taking up the Halikua development matter. The rest of the schedule for the year is so tentative that we don't have anything really set. We have tentative meetings on Wednesday, December 2nd for the Palama Lanai matter and the Wynwood Hotel matter on Maui, and on December 3rd for the Barry Trust matter, December 16th for the church matter on Hilo, and December 17th for the Barry Trust matter, adoption of order. That takes us through the end of the year.
Great. Thank you very much, Dan. Are there any questions for Mr. Ordink or commissioners? Commissioners? Nope, seeing none. Thank you very much. Our next order of business is adoption of the form of the order for the Fourth Amendment to the State Special Permit SP 97-390 for the proposed Central Maui Landfill Facilities Project at TMK 23-8-3, Lot 19, a portion thereof, as well as Lot 20, Pu'unene, Maui, Hawaii. Mr. Hakoda or Mr. Derrickson, has any written testimony been submitted on this matter?
Yeah, this is Riley. No testimony received on this matter.
Thank you very much. Are there any members of the public who wish to testify in this matter who are attending the Zoom meeting? If so, you can use your raise hand function and indicate that you wish to testify. If you do, I will admit you into the meeting as a full participant, swear you in, and provide you 2 minutes to speak. I am seeing none, so there's no public testimony on this matter. Before we take up the motion, I'd like to confirm with all of the commissioners, as well as myself, are prepared to participating in these proceedings. Commissioner Chang, are you prepared to participate?
Yes, Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Axon.
Yes.
Cabral.
Yes, I'm prepared.
Thank you. Okuda.
Yes.
Wong.
Yes.
Ohigashi.
Yes.
Giovanni.
Yes.
The chair is also prepared to participate. We will now consider adoption of the order. Commissioners, before you, present for your consideration, deliberation, and adoption are proposed findings of fact, conclusions in law, and decisions and orders prepared by the staff as instructed at the last meeting on this docket. Is there any discussion? If there's none, I will now entertain a motion to approve the form of the order for docket number SP 97-390, findings of fact, conclusions of law, and decision order approving with modifications the recommendations of the County of Maui's Planning Commission to approve a Fourth Amendment to the Land Use Commission's special permit. Commissioners, what is your pleasure?
Chair,
Commissioner Wong.
I move for the adoption of the order. And and all the other things you just said.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Wong. Is there a second?
I was seconded.
The motion has been made by Commissioner Wong and seconded by Commissioner Axon. Is there any discussion on the motion? Commissioner Ohigashi.
I will be voting in favor of the form of the order. However, I would like to note that I voted against this matter.
Thank you, Commissioner Ohigashi. The chair feels the same way. It's my obligation to say that the order correctly reflects the action of the commission, but I voted against the issuance of the permit. Any other discussion? Commissioner Okuda?
Chair, I agree that the form of the order accurately reflects the discussion and decision of the commission, but to be consistent with my vote, I'm voting no, but it's not a comment on the form of the order. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Okuda. Is there anything further, commissioners? If not, Mr. Ordenker, would you please poll the commission?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The motion is to adopt the order. Maui landfill matter, SP 97-390. Commissioner Wong.
Aye.
Commissioner Axon.
Yes.
Commissioner Ohigashi.
Aye, for the limited purpose of the form of the order.
Commissioner Cabral.
Yes.
Commissioner Okuda.
No.
Commissioner Chang.
Yes.
Commissioner Giovanni.
Aye.
Chair Schreier.
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The motion passes with 7 affirmative votes and 1 no.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Maui County, for being available on that matter. Our next agenda item, moving right along, is the continued hearing and action meeting on docket number A17-804, Hawaiian Memorial Life Plan Limited, to consider a petition to amend the Conservation Land Use District boundary into the Urban Land Use District for approximately 53.449 acres of land at Kaneohe, Oahu, Hawaii, TMK 14-5033, portion of Lot 1. Will the parties for docket number A17-804 please identify yourselves for the record? And I remind you, you may need to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Good morning. Curtis Tabata and Ben Matsubara for Hawaiian Memorial.
Good morning.
Morning, Dwayne Pang, Deputy Corporation Counsel on behalf of the City and County of Honolulu.
Good morning, Mr. Pang, and it's nice to actually see you fully rather than as a small dot in my screen.
Thank you.
Morning, Chair, members of the Commission, Dawn Apuna, Deputy Attorney General on behalf of the State Office of Planning.
And with you, virtually.
Virtually with me is Rodney Funakoshi and Lorraine Maki.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. This is Grant Yoshimori, and with me is Rich McCready, representing Intervenors Pro Se.
Thank you very much. Now let me update the record. On July 23rd, 2020, the Commission met using Zoom technology for an action meeting on this docket. The State Office of Planning concluded its presentation at that meeting, and the Commission had heard from 3 witnesses from the interveners' presentation before we concluded proceedings for the day. From July 23rd, 2020 until recently, any public comments via email and written correspondence on this matter received by the Commission have been made part of the record. And I will actually read to you all, when I pull it up, the people who have submitted testimony on this matter. Between June 22nd and 23rd, we received testimony from Pane Meatoga III from Hawaii Operating Engineers, Kara Wong Miyasato, Alec Wong Miyasato, Kalma Wong, Teresa Chow, Kathleen O'Malley, and Paulette Tam. On June 19th, we received the results of a survey conducted by Senator Jarrett Keohokalole. On June 23rd, we received testimony from Robert O'Connor. On June 24th, we received testimony from Ryan Kobayashi of the Hawaii Laborers Union, as well as Aaron Yamashita. On July 6th, testimony from Nick Drantz. On July 20th, from Gary Gray. On July 23rd, from Glenn Miyasato. And July 24th, from Lorraine Nina Toishi. On August 4th, the commission mailed our August 12th and 13th, 2020 notice of our agenda to our parties and to the statewide Oahu and Hawaii regular and email lists. I will now run over our procedures briefly for today. I've already recognized the written public testimony that has been received by the commission on this docket and posted to our website. I remind all parties who might be attending that oral testimony on this has been closed as we are in the evidentiary portion of our proceedings. The commission will continue to accept written testimony up until a final decision is reached. In addition, we will accept oral testimony at the hearing where we consider adoption of an order. The petitioner, the City and County of Honolulu, and the State Office of Planning have completed their presentations. The intervener, Huio Pikoi Loa, will continue their presentations. By the request of the commission, prior to the close of the evidentiary proceedings, the petitioner will recall Mr. Morford. Once that is completed, the commission will close the evidentiary portion of the proceedings and move on to deliberation. For the parties as well as the public, I will note that from time to time, approximately once an hour, I will call for short 10-minute breaks as well as a lunch break. Are there any questions from the parties on our procedures for today?
No questions.
No questions.
No questions.
The intervener has no questions.
Commissioners? Okay, seeing none. Thank you. Mr. Yoshimori, you ready to resume?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Okay, who is your next witness?
Our next witness is Nate Ewan. But before we go there, Dr. Lee Goff is not available today, so he won't be testifying today. So our first witness is Nate Ewan.
Okay, so sorry, Mr. Yoshimori, if we conclude proceedings today, this means that you will be unable to call Mr. Goff?
I understand. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Ewan, okay, I am going to find Mr. Ewan and promote him to be a panelist. If you would enable your video and audio, Nate. Are you able to enable your video and audio? There's your video.
Oh, there we go. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. I'm going to swear you in, and then Mr. Yoshimori can proceed with questioning.
Yes.
Good morning. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth?
Sorry, there's a cat here.
Do you affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Yoshimori, please proceed.
Thank you. For the record, Mr. Ewan's resume is Intervener's Exhibit number 5, and his written testimony is Intervener's Testimony number 1. Thanks, Nate, for appearing today. Can you please state your name and your address?
My name is Nathan Ewan, but I go by Nate. And my address is 91-233 Hanapuli Circle. That's Eva Beach, 96706.
Thank you. Can you please list some of the experience you've had related to Hawaii conservation?
Well, I get started all of this by hiking. So I've been hiking in the Hawaiian Islands for like 30 some odd years. And I first started through the Hawaiian Trail and Mountain Club. And I was in Mabel Kikina's crew. She was the
Nate, for the court reporter, I might ask you to speak slightly slower.
Okay. I started with the Hawaiian Trail and Mountain Club with Mabel Kikina, and I'm sorry, there's a cat here. I'm actually in Puna today and at a friend's house, and this cat seems to take a liking to me. Anyway, I was in Mabel Kikina's crew, and she was a 70-something-year-old grandmother. Sorry, it's a cat who organized everybody on organized the crew in maintaining the trails in the Hawaiian Islands. So we would go out into the forest and cut the vegetation that would overgrow the trails. And also if there was a landslide, this cat, I swear. Anyway.
We can proceed even with the cat meowing.
But he's messing with the angle. Anyway, so she did search and rescue as well. And so I was in her crew, and I was with her for about 10 years before she passed away. Then I also became involved in the Sierra Club, because the Sierra Club is involved more politically and in making sure that the land is protected and that conservation is properly performed in Hawaii so that our native plants and animals can live into the future. I also
Can you please
a photographer.
Excuse me, sir. This is the court reporter. Sorry to interrupt. Can you please speak louder or closer to your microphone?
I will move closer. Is this better?
Thank you. A little better. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm also a photographer. I'm not a professional photographer in that I have a regular job as an accountant that I work through during the week, but on the weekends I become an amateur hiker, photographer, naturalist. So I look in Hawaii's forests for rare native plants and animals, and right now trees are a big focus of my work. And so I've also, the Kohala Watershed Partnership asked me to be a photographer in residence with their program back in 2015. So I go periodically to Kohala, into their ohia forest, to take photos to document what's happening up in Kohala. And I'm also involved in tree planting and tree malama. For the past 10 years, I've been planting trees on Mauna Kea and Pu'uva'ava, this is on the Kona side, on Oahu at the Ala Maha Moi project in Moanalua, the Hamakua Marsh in Kailua, and on Mount Ka'ala. And most of these are rare and endangered plants. The purpose is not so much for removal of carbon from the atmosphere, but more to preserve rare and endangered species. I became a certified urban forester back in 2017. And so this is the group that does urban forestry in Honolulu, throughout the entire county of Honolulu, the entire island. And the group measures trees to help planners in assessing the effect of trees for climate change. We know that trees provide shade, reduce the temperature, reduce evaporation, and other beneficial things. Especially in the city, trees also absorb sound, which a lot of times we want to abate or to reduce. The group that I'm involved in is the Downtown Honolulu group that measures trees in the afternoons. And so we plot by GIS the location of the trees, the girth of the tree, the height, the crown size, everything, in order for planners to be able to plot in their systems to be able to model the effects of trees on the urban landscape. So I've just been all around naturalist, hiker, photographer. I have a website, hawaiianforest.com, that I have blogged about for many years. Although recently I have not been blogging, but rather posting on Facebook. So several times a week, I will post photographs of native trees and native creatures in an attempt to raise awareness of them and to give people a reason to save them. So that's kind of like my involvement in conservation in Hawaii.
Thank you. Can you describe your involvement with the discovery of the black line Hawaiian damselfly, please?
So I had provided written documentation before. It was on the Sierra Club letterhead.
One
So you
moment,
could-
Nate. Ms. McManus, you have your hand raised.
I'm sorry, I meant to take that off.
Okay,
Thank you.
sorry, continue.
So I had provided written testimony through the Oahu Sierra Club. And essentially, I'm authorized by the Oahu Sierra Club to testify on behalf of the damselflies to see that this population of damselflies survives into the future. I got involved in this project. Well, if you look at that document, you can see the pictures of it, and actually my account of the discovery of it is in there. One of the neighborhood people, I have a friend who was running for political office at that time, Patrick Shea, and he was canvassing through the neighborhood, through Oahu, and came across Liam Gray, a resident that lives on Oahu.
If I may, Mr. Yoshimori, can you direct the witness a little more tightly to what you wished him to testify about?
Thank you. Mr. Yuen, did you meet with Dan Polimis of the Fish and Wildlife and identify the damselfly as well as photograph them? And would you mind keeping your answers more succinct, please?
Okay. After I confirmed that it was the damselfly, at least to my satisfaction, I know Dan Polimis and I called him. He is the expert on these damselflies. He's the researcher and scientist who did the documentation for the listing of these creatures, the rainbow-eyed damselfly, Pinapinao anuenue, Megalagrian nigrohamidum nigrolineanum. He's the expert that had this creature placed as an endangered species on the federal list of endangered species. So I called him, brought him over, and he confirmed that indeed was the damselfly.
Okay. And did you also take photographs at that time of the damselfly to help with the confirmation? Okay,
yes, one of my specialties in photography is night insect photography. So it's dark in there, but I do have the lighting and I do have the equipment necessary to photograph them properly.
Okay. I'd like to submit Mr. Yuen as a representative of the Sierra Club, as well as an expert on locating and photographing nature insects and natural beauty.
So your test, just to be clear, Mr. Yoshimori, you want him, you don't have to submit him as a member of the club. One would just assume that he is if he claims to be. But
Okay.
You want him submitted as an expert in nature photography because your testimony that he will provide has to do with nature photography?
It's for the locating and photographing damselflies, as well as providing expertise on the damselflies habitat requirements.
If I can interject a little bit, I think that my background with tree planting and tree malama and general science and understanding the relationship between the watershed and the clouds and the trees, that I do have that general science background. So I can speak to removal of trees, deforestation of slopes, and basically general science background.
I think our main goal is to, one, confirm that the Sierra's Club position on the damselfly, as well as to get Mr. Yuen's feedback on his take on the remediation being planned by the petitioner for the Hawaiian damselflies habitat. Those are our two objectives.
You know, I guess this is my take, and you know, I want to give great deference to you as a pro se intervener. It seems to me that from your description and Mr. Yuen's self-description of his expertise, if you wanted to submit him as a naturalist, not represent him necessarily as an entomological expert, but as a qualified naturalist on Oahu, that might fit the bill of what you're trying to do.
Thank you for those recommendations. We will submit him as a naturalist. Thank you.
Okay, I'm now going to check with the comments or objections from the parties, starting with the petitioner.
The petitioner does not object to the witness's expertise as defined by the witness himself. And he describes his expertise as science and based on his personal experience. So to that extent, we would not have an objection.
Thank you. City and County, Mr. Pang.
Yeah, the city had made the same comments, but I just want to clarify one thing. Mr. Ewan is testifying on behalf of the Sierra Club?
Yes, I am.
Okay, then, yeah. With those comments, we have no objections.
Okay. State.
State has no objection.
Commissioners. Commissioner Giovanni.
I'd like to, thank you, Chair. I'd like to clarify that I did not hear, and I'm unclear whether the intervener is offering Mr. Ewan as an expert on climate change, and in particular whether trees are, and replacement of trees that in a clearing are, does he offer expertise in that field or not?
Mr. Yoshimori.
I was not planning on asking questions with regard to climate change and forestation.
Then I think that the expertise offered by the witness is acceptable with the exclusion of any of that expertise, because I don't hear that he has it. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioners, further? Okay, seeing none. Mr. Yoshimori, Mr. Ewan is admitted based as an expert to the matters that he spoke to in his testimony as a naturalist.
Thank you.
Please proceed.
So, Mr. Ewan, I just have two quick questions. Can you describe what the Sierra Club's position is on the proposed development and potential impact to the black-line damselfly?
Well, the Sierra Club is concerned that the proposed development, the proposed expansion, will adversely affect the ability of that population of damselflies to survive into the future.
Okay, thank you. And the petitioner has said that they would do the following mitigations: create an underground drainage system is one. Another one is to put a water level recorder in the well. A third one was install a water line to supplement the water if needed. And another one was to inspect for invasive fish. Do you think that will support the black-line damselfly habitat?
Those are baseline things that need to be done. I do agree with that list of items, yes. But there should be more.
Can you elaborate just a little on what those additional things you believe should be done are?
Well, those measures that were just listed will increase the water supply to the sea. And that is a very positive outcome. That the damselflies do require wet, muddy little miniature wetland in order to survive. So, you know, actually the Hawaiian Islands have been shown to be undergoing a drying trend over the past 50 to 100 years. So by providing additional water to that sea will actually increase the security to the damselfly population. From that aspect, those measures are good.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Ewan, for volunteering your time and testifying today. Mr. Ewan is available for questions.
Well, actually, I have more. When I had said that there's more things that can be done, I can elaborate on that if that's what you want to ask.
If you can bulletize just a few items of what you're thinking would be helpful.
Well, the project entails the grading of that entire slope, and there are ridges on that slope. So the high points are being cut off and the low points are being filled in. So that entire slope is going to be denuded of vegetation. We had heard from Dr. Stephen Montgomery that the damselflies are shade-loving creatures, that they are shade specialists. Unless they have a way to mitigate against that, I think that will cause what Dr. Cynthia King said, was that sometimes these populations of rare insects, they fade away over time, like peter out over time. If the conditions are not optimal for the creature by creating more sunlight in the habitat, I think that will be detrimental to their future survival.
Okay, thank you. Thank you again for your testimony. Mr. Yun is available for questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Yoshimori. Let's start with Mr. Tabata.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Yuen, for your testimony. I was going over your written testimony, and you mentioned that the damselfly's chances for survival will be greatly improved if the landowner could install a long hose to artificially supply the habitat with clean water. Is that correct, Mr. Yuen?
That's correct, and I just reaffirmed that in my previous testimony.
Yes, thank you. And could you just explain for us why that water source is important?
That seep there, well, I guess these damselflies once lived all over Oahu, all elevations, all over. But by the way, this is in the Fish and Wildlife report that was written by Dan Pohimes, the damselfly expert who wrote up the placement of these damselflies on the federal list of endangered species. These damselflies were once everywhere, but in about the 50s, 60s, 70s, their population crashed. And the report says that it's due to habitat loss and also to invasive species, primarily invasive fish, that the fish would eat the larvae. And so that caused the population to crash. So we have a unique set of circumstances at that location right above Oahu Place, where there's a little seep. The water comes up from the ground, and it's not a whole lot of water. I kind of recall, and I could be wrong, but I kind of recall the geological report saying 30 gallons an hour, not that much more. And so it basically makes that part wet and muddy. Very little standing water, so no fish. So actually that's a plus to the damselflies because the fish are the ones that are eating the larvae. So if the fish aren't there, then that improves their chances of success. So it's that, and also because it's so dark. You know, there's a lot of trees in there. They're mainly invasive species, Schefflera, strawberry guava, albizia. And so these trees are not really desirable, but nonetheless, they provided the shade that allowed, number one, the seep not to dry out, because in there it's quite dark, it's quite humid. Without the trees, it would be much different, and the seep could potentially dry out. You know, given intense sunlight on that little muddy little patch, that could definitely have an impact on the long-term survival of those damselflies. What we're concerned about is that, okay, so it was the confluence of those three factors: very little water, but enough water for them to breed, and it was dark, and that's what allowed that population to continue into to survive into the future. So these damselflies are pushed all the way into the northern ko'olau. That's the critical habitat for the damselflies in the northern ko'olau. I believe there are 18 populations that had been identified. And then there's no damselflies anywhere else in the island except in Kaneohe at that one spot. So it was a fortuitous confluence of factors that enabled this population of damselflies to exist.
Thank you, Mr. Yuen. You mentioned that it's possible that the seep could dry up. What would happen to the damselflies if the seep were to dry up? What is your understanding?
they'll eventually die. Dr. Steve Montgomery said that he believes the larvae could survive in the mud for a few months. So theoretically, if it dried out and the last larvae are in the mud, you have 2 months until they will die in the mud.
You mentioned your blog, and I was reading your blog. It's very interesting. And this one entry I was reading mentioned that back in June 2016, Liam Gray took you and Mr. Yoshimori, Mr. McCready, Julie McCready to go see the damselflies on the Hawaiian Memorial property. Do you remember that?
Yes, that I wrote that blog entry to document what happened.
Right, right. Is this the time where the damselfly was discovered?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Well, actually, to be more correct, Liam Gray discovered the damselfly. So it probably was a few weeks before that. So that's the actual discovery day. I don't know exactly what it is, but then that's when I became aware of it, and that's how Dan Pohemus became aware of it, and that's how this became known.
Okay. Was anybody from Hawaiian Memorial present at that
No.
visit?
No.
Thank you. That blog entry goes on to talk about, it says, HMP became aware of the damselfly population at the Kaneohe Neighborhood Board meeting on July 20, 2017. Is that correct, Mr. Ewing?
Probably within a few days before that, but I was at that meeting, and that's when, at least I'm aware, that the HMP became aware of it. Prior to that, they were not aware of the existence of those damselflies.
Thank you. And that's about 1 year after the interveners learned about the damselfly, correct?
Yes.
And do you remember, I'm sorry, were you present at that neighborhood board meeting?
I was.
Do you recall what was being discussed at the neighborhood board meeting? Was the Hawaiian Memorial expansion project being discussed?
Yes, it was. HMP had many of their friends and supporters in green T-shirts, and they supported the, I guess, proposal. I guess they were looking for support from the neighborhood board to proceed with the expansion.
And how did the subject of the damselfly come about?
Probably the best person to ask is Grant Yoshimura himself, since he's the guy that did that. And my memory is kind of like fuzzy about that. So he's the guy who did it.
Oh, so Mr. Yoshimori is the one who raised the issue of the damselfly.
That's my recollection.
Okay, and do you recall what the message was regarding the damselfly by Mr. Yoshimori?
I don't really recall, but I know it's in opposition to the project because there are these damselflies. But I don't recall the exact angle that he took.
Okay, okay. Thank you. I'm just asking for what you remember. Thank you, Mr. Ewan. Appreciate your testimony. I have no more questions.
Thank you, Mr. Tabata. Mr. Pang.
The city has no questions for this witness. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Apuna.
No questions.
Commissioners, questions for the witness. Commissioner Okuda, followed by Commissioner Wong.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Ewan, for your testimony. You testified that you are a naturalist. Just so that I get an idea of your scope or geographic scope of knowledge, can I ask you the local question? Which high school did you graduate from?
I went to McKinley High School.
Okay. During the time that you were growing up in Hawaii, how much time did you spend on the windward side, particularly the Kaneohe side?
Not much. We lived in Kalihi. We would go fishing in Kahana Valley, a couple times a month, maybe, for a few years. I mean, not often, but I've always loved the windward side. But I wouldn't say I had a lot of contact with windward Oahu until later in life.
Oh, okay. Yeah, even though I grew up in Kailua before Kailua became a tourist trap, my mother's family's from Kalihi, but you would not want to visit the neighborhood where the family house is. Let me ask you this, okay, about and you've given testimony also, I believe, as a representative of the Sierra Club. There's been evidence placed in the record that there is a memorandum of understanding between the Ko'olapoko Hawaiian Civic Club and Hawaiian Memorial Park, a preliminary memorandum, and there's been testimony about how that if this project moves forward, Hawaiian Memorial Park is willing to enter into an arrangement still to be determined with the Ko'olapoko Hawaiian Civic Club with respect to a cultural preserve. Who is in a better position to give advice or control over the area with respect to the cultural preserve? The Sierra Club or the Ko'olapoko Hawaiian Civic Club?
The Ko'olapoko Hawaiian Civic Club.
Now, are you aware, or there's been representations made that the Ko'olapoko Hawaiian Civic Club is in favor of this expansion? Are you aware of those representations?
Yes, I am.
Do you dispute the fact that the Ko'olapoko Hawaiian Civic Club is in favor of the expansion?
I hear that they're in favor of the expansion, yes.
Wouldn't that be a significant factor that the Ko'olapoko Hawaiian Civic Club believes when you look at all the factors here, and I assume they've looked at all the factors, that they are in favor of the expansion?
I didn't quite understand the question. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, do you find it significant that the Ko'olapoko Hawaiian Civic Club is allegedly in favor of the expansion?
Okay, regardless about the damselflies. Yeah, I guess it is significant because they prioritize the heiau, kawaiiwai, heiau, and the preservation of that cultural treasure above the damselflies. I think they prioritize it that way. And I definitely understand why, but this is also a very a natural treasure. And it's also called Hawaiian, it's a Hawaiian cultural significance. The pinapinau is pinapinau anuenue, the rainbow-eyed damselfly. It has a Hawaiian name. That's significant in and of itself. And these damselflies are in the Kumulipo, and there are heiau named after pinau. It is a culturally significant animal. So in addition to protection of the heiau, which I fully support, the damselflies need to be protected too. And actually Hawaiian Memorial Park actually has been, in my opinion, supportive of the damselfly population in that they've already moved back the boundary lines where they had originally placed it because the damselfly population was discovered, they actually moved it back. But now the dangers that I see is that by removing all the trees, it's going to reduce the sunlight. So I would like to ask Dr. Cynthia King, the state entomologist,
Yeah,
if the conditions are not optimized for the damselflies, whether or not that's going to be an issue for her.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mr. Yuen, I don't mean to cut you off, but my questions are a lot more limited. Okay, if I can ask you this.
I'm rambling. I'm
Okay,
rambling.
yeah, I'm trying to keep my questions limited here and of limited scope. I'm not sure about how much of this hearing or all these days of hearing you've observed by Zoom, but I asked a number of questions of a number of witnesses about the fact that there is no legal duty to affirmatively or take positive steps to preserve, for example, cultural sites or anything like that. The duty is basically not to do anything affirmatively to harm things. And so let me ask the question this way. You know, one of the issues that I'm struggling with is the fact that it seems to be a trade-off that's being proposed here. That if this development does not go forward, then certain promises to take actions to preserve things like the damselfly habitat, cultural sites, there does not seem to be a vehicle under the law to basically force the landowner to take these steps. Do you agree that that's a reasonable way of looking at part of the decision we have to make, which is whether or not the trade-off here, you know, having the owner affirmatively agree to do something which it is not otherwise required to do, whether it's worth the trade-off? That's what we're looking at.
That is the conundrum that we're in, because there are things about the project that are good. And I guess certain assurances are being made that to mitigate against some of the things that have detrimental impact, like the removal of invasive species from the retention ponds. You know, the retention ponds, if you look at where they are relative to the damselfly habitat, is right next to it. And one of the major concerns is invasive species. So if they don't remove the invasive species from the retention ponds, they could end up in a damselfly habitat.
Well, Mr.
Right. And so there needs to be ways for them to maintain the property, but there isn't any mechanism in the law to force the landowner to do that. That's the conundrum that the Land Use Commission finds itself in.
So we might be faced with, and I'm speaking, for example, just specifically about the damselfly, we really might be being faced with a decision here that if we wanted to have specific promises made for specific actions to be taken to affirmatively protect the damselfly habitat, the trade-off might have to be that we have to approve the development. That's really the quid pro quo. We're talking about a quid pro quo. Do you agree that that's one reasonable way of looking at the question that's being faced here?
Yes, provided that additional safeguards are made to protect the light levels at that habitat from being detrimentally affected by additional sunlight.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. I have no further questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Commissioner Okuda. Commissioner Wong.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the questions I have is following up on Commissioner Okuda in terms of one, with if Hawaiian Memorial, as say they're going to add water to that pond, wouldn't that help with the evaporation? So you keep that, you know, water in there?
Yes, the addition of water to supplement what's in that spring will generally add more security to the damselflies in the future. Provided, however, there's not too much water, because then fish can live inside there. So there needs to be a way to monitor the amount of water in there so that it's just right. Not too much, not too little, just right.
Okay, so
thank you for the reference to Auntie Malialani.
So the other question I have is, you know, as Commissioner Okuda said, if they don't do anything, let's say that there's an earthquake and that seepage or that water dries up, don't have. So the damselfly would die anyway, right? But if
That's
they,
correct. If
Hawaiian
something were to disrupt the water supply for whatever reason, yeah,
Right.
their history, yes.
yeah, because Hawaii Memorial Park, as Commissioner Okuda stated, they don't have any legal obligations to do anything, correct? So if I was, let's say, a kid and I said, let's go cause trouble and throw soap in there, that could kill the dam. I mean, you know how kids are. They're kind of, some of them are bad like me. So what I'm just saying is, right now I'm in a conundrum too. If we give Hawaii Memorial Park the agreement, then it's, to me, the damselfly will be more safe because they'll be more protected. People will look at it more compared to if they don't do anything, Memorial Park, don't touch it. So I'm in that area right now.
For the additional water does provide additional security to the damselflies in the future, so that the habitat will remain viable. Provided that they provide a way, like when they denude that slope, the sunlight will be hitting directly on that. Well, when the sun is at a certain angle, it's going to hit directly on the damselfly habitat. So during construction, I think they need to. I've seen on construction site they have those kind of these walls with a cloth in order to stop the dust from being blown. Well, this would also have to be up on the angle to prevent the sun when it's at that angle from affecting. But I haven't seen any plan from Hawaii Memorial Park in their construction whether they will do that. And also, they need to restore the landscape. They need, after they denude that slope, they have to, at least close to the habitat, they need to put more trees so that when the sun is at a low angle, there are trees there to block the sunlight. So I have not seen that in their plan, and I would recommend that the Land Use Commission to include that as part of the conditions.
So
approval when it's given.
So let's just say that they do add these things. If they do add or don't, during the conditions, would the Sierra Club be okay with this and support the project after that?
I wouldn't say that we would support the project. We wouldn't object to the project. So if they provide enough safeguards to ensure that the damselfly population will survive into the future, we would no longer object.
Okay. It's just one of those things that, we're looking at those items. And I also know that the windward side is pretty dark at times because I used to live there with all the rain. So, I haven't been there for a while, but, the clouds does come by the ko'olaus and does shade the area. You don't think that would help too?
Well, yes and no. Clearly, clouds over the windward side would block it. But the clouds are there now. When the sun sets and the sun is at an angle, it could provide an opportunity for the light to hit the damselfly habitat from a horizontal angle. And that's what I'm concerned about, that the lighting conditions would cause the population to peter out slowly over time.
Okay, that's all. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Wong. Commissioner Ohigashi.
I just have a few questions. I understand your position is that you need to be shown some mitigation regarding the during the construction phase as to whether or not to prevent shade to keep the shade over there so that we have as close as natural habitat as possible. Is that something that can be handled by the state? I guess, what was it called? Well, the state expertise in determining what those mitigation should be, what those mitigation measures should be.
I guess ultimately it's with Dr. Cynthia King, yeah, the state entomologist. Yeah? I think they ultimately decide, I think.
Okay, so a condition that you would be satisfied with, or the Sierra Club would be satisfied with, would be that the habitat be protected as much as possible in accordance with guidance from the state. Dr. King.
Well, the
Ms.
concern
King.
that I have is I actually heard Dr. Cynthia King's testimony, and she didn't object to the project. The concern that I have is that I'm not sure if she is aware that the damselflies are shade specialists and that their continued survival may require shade. Dr. Stephen Montgomery, who testified earlier, said that they were shade-loving creatures. So I think that question should be posed to her, whether or not the shade is an important factor. And I guess ultimately, I would have to defer to her because she's the one who makes that decision.
That is correct. So if we fashion a condition that makes her responsible to determine whether or not there's sufficient shade in that area or sufficient mitigation measures in that area, that would satisfy the Sierra Club. Would that not?
Well, I wouldn't say we would be satisfied, because if the outcome wasn't what we thought was optimal for the damselflies, then we would still object.
Okay, because I don't understand your testimony. First, you tell me that we're going mitigation measures should be increased, and that the state entomologist is a person to make that determination. And when I offer a mitigation for that, your statement is, well, that's not enough. So I'm just trying to figure out.
Well, I mean,
clearly, how to address your concern. Let me finish. How to address your concern, the Sierra Club's concern, that regarding the damselfly, and to make sure that the entomologist, state entomologist, if we pass this, we have a condition saying that this is the mitigation factor that you have to use, since that's the nature of your testimony. You can answer that if you like.
Well, I guess I would answer that by saying that we want to provide the best opportunities for damselflies to survive into the future, and we believe shade is a factor. And ultimately, I believe the state entomologists would make the decision about whether or not that was an important factor.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any more questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Ohigashi. Commissioners. Oh, Commissioner Chang. Hi. I see your physical and virtual hand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you so much, Mr. Ewan. You look like you're in a very beautiful place this morning.
Hilo is heaven on earth.
Oh, but thank you for taking the time to join us and to provide this testimony. I only have one question. You have been offered as an expert as a naturalist, but you're, so would you agree that for purposes of expert testimony and with respect to the damselfly, that your qualifications, that Dr. King or with DLNR is probably more qualified than you are to make determinations regarding the damselfly mitigations?
Absolutely. I don't have any PhD. Well, I am a member of the Hawaiian Entomological Society, and I'm very active in hiking to remote places in the Hawaiian Islands and taking photographs of native plants and trees and insects. And so I often post them to the news groups, and I'm a member of the entomology community, but I'm not an expert. I know what the insects are, and I can photograph them, and I can show you what they look like, but the experts are the researchers.
And I appreciate that. Thank you so much. And I appreciate the good work that you do, but as well as your testimony. Thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Chang. Commissioners, further questions for the witness? Commissioners, any questions for the witness? If not, if I may, Mr. Ewan? Can I clarify, are you being paid in any manner for this work on behalf of the interveners?
No, I'm not.
You're doing this purely as a volunteer?
Yes. I mean, I have a personal interest because I was involved in the initial discovery and the confirmation of the damselfly population. So I kind of have a personal interest in this one.
Okay. And then I would like to ask you quickly, because I think your expertise is uniquely suited to it, a question that I asked Ms. King, and I believe, just for the record, Ms. King has a master's degree, but not a doctorate. I think Ms. King, I asked her whether she felt community engagement, in addition to the physical changes to physical infrastructure and predator control, was an integral part of conservation for the successful protection of the species. So is it just as important that the community in the surrounding area know of and, you know, at least don't take harmful actions against this creature, just as much as it is important to have good drainage and a hose and protect trees? Would you agree or disagree with that statement?
I would agree, yes.
So, so far in the protective measures that have been offered, there's not a community engagement or education process. Would you believe that such a process would be of the benefit of protecting the species?
Yes, I think they could do like really easy things too, like just visit the habitat a few times a month, make sure there's water in there, look around to see that there are no invasive species in town. So volunteers could have a really big impact in trying to ensure these damselflies survive into the future.
Okay, thank you. I don't have anything further, Mr. Ewan. Is there anything further from the commissioners? If not, Mr. Yoshimori, do you have any redirect?
I do not, thank you. Thank you again, Mr. Ewan.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to dismiss Mr. Ewan as a witness. It's 10:16 a.m. I'd like to take a 10-minute break to 10:26 a.m. Mr. Yoshimori, who will you be admitting as a witness next?
Our next witness will be Dr. Stephen Businger.
Okay, and followed by, how many more do you have?
That will be it. That will conclude our presentation.
Okay, so we're going to adjourn, or not adjourn, we're going to go into recess till 10:26 a.m. We'll let in Mr. Businger as your final witness.
On the screen.
Yeah, I see you now. Okay, sorry. With 22 little squares to look at, I don't immediately always see exactly who is there.
Yeah, they probably move around as well.
Okay. Yes, they do. Okay, we have a minute, folks, if you can get ready. And the proper pronunciation of your last name, Doctor?
Businger.
Businger. One of my doctoral professors was Steve Businger, so I'll try not to confuse that.
Yeah, and then there's a famous actress, Kim Basinger.
Yes, you bear no resemblance, I'm sorry to say. So.
Yeah.
Are we ready, folks? Mr. Pang, Mr. Tabata, I see you now. Okay. Okay. It's 10:26 a.m. Let's go back on the record. Interveners next and final witness, Steve Businger. Dr. Steve Businger has joined the meeting. I will swear you in, and then Mr. Yoshimori, you can proceed with your direct examination. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth?
I do.
Great, thank you. Mr. Yoshimori, you may proceed.
Thank you. Thank you again, Dr. Businger, for testifying today. For the record, Dr. Businger's resume is Interveners Exhibit 6, and his testimony is Interveners Testimony number 5. Dr. Businger, can you please state your name and address for the record, please?
My name is Steve Businger. I live at 4837 Sierra Drive in Honolulu, Hawaii.
Thank you. Can you give us a quick summary of your educational background?
Sure. I have a bachelor's degree in atmospheric sciences from the University of Washington. a master's in astrogeophysics from the University of Colorado, and a PhD in atmospheric sciences from the University of Washington.
Thank you. Can you please state some of the recent positions you've held related to the field of meteorology?
Yes, I have been a assistant professor originally in North Carolina, and that was in starting in 1986. And 1993, I moved to the
Excuse
university.
me, doctor. Excuse me, doctor. Can you, this is the court reporter, excuse me for interrupting. Can you speak clearer or louder? Get closer to your microphone.
Let me see, make sure that I'm connected to the right microphone. Sorry.
You're sounding fine now, but your voice lowers and I can't hear the words. So
Now, how does this sound? Is that significant?
that's perfect.
Okay.
Absolutely. Thank you.
That was my fault. I have a microphone as well as my laptop, and unfortunately, it was using my laptop rather than my microphone that I have separate. So.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Okay, so I was talking about my history of employment, and I was an assistant professor at the University of North Carolina State University until 1993. I had just received tenure at the time, and I moved to University of Hawaii at that point and was hired as an associate professor. And then I promoted to full professor in 1999 and have been in that same position until currently. I've been chair of the Atmospheric Science Department for the last 4 years.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to submit Dr. Businger as an expert on meteorology.
Any objections? Petitioner?
No objection.
No objections from the city.
No objections from the state.
Commissioners? Seeing none, Dr. Businger is so admitted. Please continue, Mr. Yoshimori.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Businger, Hawaiian Memorial is designing detention basins, capturing and treating, this is a quote, capturing and treating runoff generated from the cemetery would be designated for a 100-year frequency, 1-hour duration storm event, which is 4.5 inches per hour. That's from the EIS page 3-95. How often does a 100-year, 1-hour duration event occur?
Recurrence intervals are calculated using past data. So the history of nearby rain gauges are used, and then special mathematical distributions are applied for extreme events. And it turns out that the probability that a 100-year, 1-hour event will occur is about 1% for any given year. That's not to say that 2 years in a row you couldn't have a 100-year event.
Excuse me just a minute here. Is designing for the 100-year, 1-hour event reasonable?
In this particular application, it is not reasonable. And the reason I say that is because when we have flood events, it usually occurs in larger scale atmospheric disturbances or storm systems like conal lows, winter storm frontal passages, tropical cyclones that pass, tropical depressions that come through. And a 1-hour event would be a heavy downpour associated with one thunderstorm, for example. However, usually if there is such a extreme thunderstorm downpour, there will be rain on both sides. And what you really want to do is look at the storm event as a whole, not a individual rain shower event associated with such a storm. And therefore, the optimal or the relevant recurrence interval to look at is for a 24-hour rainfall event at a minimum. And for a 24-hour rainfall event, the 100-year threshold is 15 inches.
Do you believe that the planned retention/detention volumes are sufficient given the physical circumstances of the site?
Let me, well, it's pretty clear to me that the volume is not sufficient. And the reason I say that is that they are looking at a 4.5-inch rainfall. They should be looking at a 15-inch rainfall. And they're looking at how long it takes for that volume to discharge over a 24-hour period. So you ought to take a 24-hour rainfall event, which would, of course, overwhelm their current plan.
Thank you. Do you anticipate that the frequency and intensity of events with rainfalls exceeding 4.5 inches in 1 hour will increase?
The scientific research on this topic is quite clear, both in the United States and in the world as a whole. There has been an increase in heavy rainfall events, and therefore the recurrence intervals have been growing less. We have been seeing once in 10,000 year flood events happening in places like Boulder, Colorado. And we've seen unprecedented rainfall events that happen in the Hawaiian Islands, such as the Kauai flood of 50 inches in 24 hours, which broke the US rainfall record. So, and the reason why we are seeing this increase in extreme rainfall events is also very well understood. And it has to do with the fact that the sea surface temperatures are gradually becoming warmer. And this is in response to the increase in the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere from fossil fuel burning. This warmer water pushes more water vapor into the atmosphere. The amount of water vapor in the atmosphere is directly related to the sea surface temperature, because the sea surface temperature, at the sea surface temperature, you have an equilibrium between the sea surface and that temperature and the atmosphere. So warmer sea surface, more moisture over that sea surface. We are surrounded by the Pacific Ocean here, and as the waters in the Pacific Ocean gradually warm, we will see an enhancement of extreme rainfall events.
Thank you. I think you touched upon this, but is there evidence of global warming?
There is evidence of global warming. We see it in many, many different data sets, which are independent in a sense. You see it in the fact that the ice caps are reducing in extent, that alpine glaciers are dwindling, permafrost is melting, the atmospheric global temperature is rising, and the precipitable water, or the amount of water vapor in the atmosphere, is also rising. So there are many, many independent data sets that are being looked at and that are giving us that, that observation.
Okay, thank you. And what can the state and the city do to help alleviate climate change?
Well, it's very important that we, of course, limit the amount of carbon dioxide we put in the air, but also we need to limit deforestation and plant a lot of trees, because that helps to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Businger, for volunteering your time and your testimony, and for repeatedly coming to these hearings. So thank you so much. Dr. Businger is available for questions.
Thank you very much. We'll start with the intervener, or excuse me, with the petitioner, Mr. Tabata.
Thank you. Dr. Businger, you testified regarding our retention basins or detention basins. Let me ask you this specific question. Okay. Are you saying that our retention/detention basins are not in compliance with the city's drainage rules? Is that what you're telling us?
I am saying that the design does not take into account the likelihood that a flood is going to overwhelm that particular retention volume of 12,700 cubic feet.
I understand you're saying that there's going to be a lot more rain and a lot more runoff. And because of that, your opinion is that the basins are insufficient. I guess what I'm asking you is, can you point to any specific rule in the city's drainage rules that you think we're in violation of?
No.
Thank you. I have no more questions.
Thank you.
The city has no questions for this witness. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Apuna.
OP has no questions. Thank you.
Commissioners, starting with Commissioner Wong, followed by Commissioner Okuda.
Thank you, Chair. Doctor, I have a question. In terms of if the landscape is kept as is and a 100-year storm happens, would it be worse in your estimation?
Would the runoff be worse?
Yes.
Well, when you have a slope that is covered by forest, the ability for that landscape to retain the water and not have it run off is better.
Okay. So the question I have is, sometimes I've seen in the TVs, when you have big rains, you see these big mountains come down because of, all that rain. Could that happen too with those big rains?
In the particular landscape that is involved here, it seems to me that it's pretty stable.
So
the roots of the forest hold the soil quite well.
Okay, so if they don't do anything, it'll be okay. But if they do something, there may be runoff. Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is that the environmental plan, where they look at a 1-hour rainfall rate of 4.5 inches, and they build a retention to match that, is insufficient. That's basically just based on my understanding of recurrence intervals for storm rainfall. It is insufficient.
Okay, that's all I need to know. Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Wong. Commissioner Okuda.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Doctor, for your testimony. And I apologize if my next question sounds more basic, but unfortunately, I got my bachelor's from University of Hawaii without taking hard science, and I'm paying for it now. Can you explain to me why you believe that the petitioner or the landowner is underestimating the amount of rain that should be expected for the site?
Well, they have put together a retention volume, which includes 3 ponds and a volume of 12,700 cubic feet. And they say that the amount of outflow from this over a 24-hour period will allow for a 4.5 inch of rainfall, which can occur once in 100 years in a 1-hour period. I'm merely making the point that if you have a thunderstorm that produces 4.5 inches in an hour, that is not the standard to which you want to design this, because storm systems tend to rain for longer than an hour. And I think that we all know this living in Hawaii. I've lived here for 30 years, and it seems to me that when you get a storm system with heavy rainfall, you really want to look at a 24-hour period. And then you're looking at more like 15 inches. And that's what should be designed for in order for it to be a reasonable, have a reasonable chance of mitigating the hazard.
Okay. And even though this might be a real basic question, if the storm or the water drainage or retention system is not designed or cannot sustain keeping the capacity of the rain that occurs during that type of storm, what are some of the foreseeable results? Would flooding of the neighbors be a foreseeable result?
Yes.
Okay. Now, and correct me if I'm wrong, but in your report, did you also include some photos and discussion of the Coloco Dam tragedy on Kauai?
Yes.
Okay. I had the unfortunate participation of representing a party in that case. Isn't it true that it wasn't simply the storm itself that caused the collapse of the Coloco Reservoir?
That is correct.
Yeah, in fact, what some would say was a major or substantial factor in causing the dam to collapse was that the landowner at that point in time, and I say the landowner, that's the owner of the cinder cone, which became the Coloco Reservoir, had filled in the concrete spillway of the dam. So when it rained, the water overtopped the other parts of the dam, causing the collapse. Is that your understanding of what happened?
That is correct.
So in other words, it wasn't simply rainfall that caused the collapse. It was conduct, and we don't have to get into whether that's good conduct, bad conduct, or criminal conduct, but it was a conduct of a human being that was a substantial factor in contributing to the collapse of the dam and the deaths of the individuals downstream, correct?
That's correct. And if you look at that particular month, that was March of 2006, Oahu in the region that we're talking about received between 20 and 40 inches of rainfall within that month. So whatever, if this had been constructed prior to March of 2006, there's every likelihood that these ponds would have failed miserably.
Okay, and I'm not saying that necessarily that anyone would be killed or we would have a disaster of the scope that resulted downstream of the Coloco Reservoir, but is it fair to say that your opinion is it is foreseeable there would be some amount of damage if that type of rainfall reoccurred on Oahu?
That's a good summary, yes.
Okay. Well, do you have an opinion of how likely or not likely such rainfall events will happen in the future? Because, you know, we haven't seen a Coloco type rain recently. I mean, what do you have an opinion? I mean, how likely or unlikely is it that we, given all the factors that you testified to and other factors which you might want to comment on, that type of rainfall is probable or not probable?
Well, if you, that was, you know, 2006, not that terribly long ago, but in June of 2019, we had over 4 inches on Oahu in an hour. Same happened October 29th, 2018. April 13th through 15, 2018, we had that, you know, up to 6 inches over the windward side of Oahu, and we had 50 inches of rainfall on Kauai. In March 9th of 2012, there was a supercell that developed over the Ko'olaus and went right over Kaneohe, dropped 4.5-inch hail, and also produced 2 tornadoes in Kailua. These extreme events are not that rare. There was the Honolulu flood of Halloween flood of 2004 that had 9 inches of rain over 6 hours. There was a New Year's flood of 1987 that had 25 inches of rainfall in 24 hours, produced $50 million worth of damage in Hawaii Kai. These events in Hawaii are not that rare, and the problem is that they're becoming more common. They will become more common.
Yeah, and this is your opinion based on your.
No, that's the science.
Yeah, and the opinion that you give based on the science is based on your education and experience as documented in your resume. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. Yeah, you know, last fast question. Not that people should be judged by publications or anything like that, but how many articles or books have you published in your field of science?
I have close to 100 peer-reviewed publications. I've published several textbooks.
Okay, thank you very much, Doctor. I have no further questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Okuda. Commissioner Chang, followed by Commissioner Ohigashi.
Thank you, Dr. Businger. I appreciate hearing your testimony today and you taking the time to provide that to the Land Use Commission. I would suspect that it's very frustrating for those of you who have expertise and you see these, you see these things coming and nothing, you know, nothing's done. The question I have is, do you know what process the City and County of Honolulu goes through to update their requirements? I think it was we had testimony about it. There's methodologies, a plate 6 or a rational method. Do you know what kinds of what is the process to change those requirements so they more accurately reflect the conditions that you're talking about?
Well, that's a good question. I'm afraid that is above my pay grade. I haven't delved into that side of things, and I probably should. I think that it behooves us to try to have input on policy if we understand the science.
And you're right. I mean, and I think that is part of my point, that this expertise is extremely valuable to regulators who are setting standards and regulations that people have to comply with. Because when Mr. Tabata asked you, is this, you know, are they in any violation given what their plans are? And you said no. But yet your own expertise indicates, you know, this is potentially a disaster to happen. But for purposes of, I see as the Land Use Commission, it is looking at what are those regulations and what are the requirements? Because I think it would be very helpful to have, well, one, as you say, you know, understanding what the process for the city to update these standards are so that it more accurately reflects the current conditions. But so as I understand it, your testimony, your response to Mr. Tabata was at this time, the plans as proposed by the petitioner are consistent with the county requirements. There's no violation.
I don't know the answer to that question, to be honest, but I would say that as commissioners, it behooves you to look at the big picture. And you can decide if something needs to have a further look, and also take into account things such as changing climate, the value to the community of open space, the importance of endangered species that might be impacted. I think that this is a complicated question, and I think that it would be not outside of your purview to look at the big picture and to try to make a decision that takes everything into account.
And I would echo that. I think that is the role of the commission, to look at all of those different issues that, and there are certain standards But undoubtedly, you're right that the commission's role is much broader. We do have the authority to consider all of these potential, make full consideration of all the impacts as well as the impacts to the public. But thank you very much. I greatly appreciate your testimony, and I wish that the city would consider putting together a little task force of people like you to provide them good guidance in making, adjusting our regulations so they more reflect the conditions. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Don.
Chair, you're muted.
Sorry. Commissioner Ohigashi, followed by Commissioner Cabral.
Yeah, Doctor, I have just a few questions. Your analysis of the amount of rainfall or the standard that we should be using, that would apply to most every place in the state of Hawaii, would it?
Yes, but keep in mind that the rainfall amounts that the recurrence interval is very specific to a location. And I provided a table to Grant, which showed the recurrence interval for the slope of, in Kaneohe of this particular development request. So yes. It varies substantially from place to place what these recurrence intervals in rainfall are, because the rainfall itself varies significantly across each island.
And what I'm trying to get at is not necessarily that. What I'm concerned about is how are we to determine whether or not to amend the boundary without specific standards that we are to follow. Like the city and county, in terms of their drainage policy, has specific standards and calculations that are used that are embodied in law. And so I'm having a hard time. So what you're describing, I'm having a hard time because what you're describing is that we should get rid of these particular standards and we should look at site-specific standards to make that determination. Is that what you're getting at, or am I?
Again, I'm not an expert in the city's standards, and I would really ask you to look at the big picture here, that you've got some open space, you've got endangered species, you're affecting forest, which is helping with regard to carbon sequestration, and you have a situation in which you have a decision to make that's going to impact the natural environment in a very substantial way. The question is, do the benefits of having a few more places for a cemetery, with all that implies in terms of what people want to do when they leave this plane, do those benefits outweigh the potential losses that are involved in doing this? And I think that we have to look at that very carefully in this case and look at all the different testimony and all the different aspects. It's very easy to say, well, let's just change the boundary of the city a little bit here and there. But it is a bit of a slippery slope, and this is a very finite island. So I think there is something bigger here to think about.
Well, Doctor, that's why I think the founders, the state, and their wisdom established a land use commission. So But beyond that, what I'm concerned about is this, and you know, and maybe maybe the best analogy that I'm coming from is I'm a lawyer, and it's like the blind man and the elephant. We can only determine what we can feel or what our senses tell us to do. What I'm trying to, and what we're given over here is a standard that is in the law, and we ask, and that is applicable to everybody on the island. And I'm just, without, so what I think that your testimony would create a situation where if we follow your testimony and we follow your guidance and we follow that it may place us in a position where we technically are requiring more than the law provides. Or maybe we're going beyond our scope to require things that the law provides. So I'm having that difficulty, and I'm sure that you won't solve it for me, but I just wanted to express that difficulty that I'm having right now.
And can I answer that question as a forensic meteorologist? So let's talk about the legal aspect of this just for a moment, because I do work in this area quite frequently. When there's a flood and there's damage to property, including Coloco Dam, for example, I was also retained in that case. And the question was, was it foreseeable that what this guy did by filling in the spillway was going to create a disaster? Was that foreseeable in any way? And the answer was, from the meteorology and the science, is yes, that's foreseeable. Now here we're kind of facing a similar situation. Sure, you can go down the very narrow road of the law, which I don't happen to know what it is, pertaining to building these retaining ponds. But think about this. An event's going to happen in 5 years. I'm expecting within the construction, if this goes through, within 5 years, you're going to see a flood, and there's going to be damage downstream, and then there will be lawsuits. And the lawsuits could very well come back to the city, the county, and say, look, this was foreseeable. And there's a certain amount of responsibility that you're going to have to deal with this in a financial way down the road. So that's how I would sort of frame that question.
There's that other part about that negligence and tort, but I won't bore you with it. It's the first part, whether there's a duty and whether there's an actual action. But in this case, we're dealing with somebody who meets the legal requirement. And that is, I'm trying to, and if we are to adopt I don't believe we can adopt your standards and have it enforced by the city or anybody else unless those standards are shown to be to the city that those standards are inadequate to be met. And that's another issue that I think that may not come up in this situation. So I'm just expressing to you my frustration in trying to deal with that problem.
Yeah, no, I understand, and I don't envy you your position to have to, deal with this and the consequences and all the rest. I would just say, look at the big picture. If you are absolutely constrained in making your decision based on a very narrow reading of the law, then so be it. That's beyond my ken.
Okay, thank you, Doctor. Commissioner Cabral, followed by Commissioner Okuda.
Okay, thank you. And I appreciate the questions of my fellow commissioners and of the information you've given Mr. Businger. So some of what my question was has been already touched on but with some of your other answers. In terms of the big picture, yeah, we should all definitely get rid of our cars and any more freeways, because we know that people will die in a freeway. And I have horses. One of them could kill you too, trust me. So we'll all be walking. But okay, first off, let me let you know, I live in Hilo in Waikeuka. I have seen whitewater rapids running around my house many times, and I've lived there for over 30 years. So I am familiar with heavy, heavy, heavy rain that is unbelievable. You would not drive a car in it, so lots of rain in my world. But what I'm concerned about when I look at the level of rainfall that I see personally at my house, as well as the level of rainfall that you're describing could occur in this location as it is naturally sitting there right now. I mean, clearly at one time in the history of that area, there were no trees there, because right at one point it was all lava or rock formations. So at one point there was no trees, and then the jungle has grown in, and now the jungle covers that in other areas, as around my house also. I live with jungle. So the thing is, what I'm concerned about though is the level of rainfall is such that when you talk about the increase, if nothing is done, what is the probability that some of all of that hillside will still yet come down on those houses below? I mean, is there a guarantee that if nothing's done, it won't happen versus if efforts are made to control it? I don't know. Do you have any comments on it? Just shifts the liability from us to God, I guess. But anyway, what do you think about what's going to happen if nothing is done?
I think that's a pretty good summary, that it shifts the liability from us to God.
Well, there.
Which in some sense is maybe not a bad way of looking at this.
So you're not sure. I mean, you don't. Of course, I'm assuming you haven't been able to do one huge analysis, but the petitioner has had engineers analyze that area clearly to try and come up with what their plan is. So, but in terms of your knowledge of it, there's no way you can predict if in fact that hillside would come down on its own with, the 50 inches of rain in 24 hours.
That hillside's been there in pretty much that configuration for centuries, for sure. And so these rainfall events, these heavy rainfall events, have been hammering that area for centuries. And there's, you'd have to, of course, get a soil engineer to verify this, but it would be my testimony that slope is not going to go anywhere. It has the slope currently at its steepest is about 45 degrees. And for sloughing to occur, it really needs to be a little steeper than that, ideally.
Isn't our concern that what will happen to the houses below that touch up quite high up into that area? Because that's where the flooding would, if we went back 1,000 years ago, we wouldn't worry because those houses wouldn't be there, but and any storm drains wouldn't be there. But so the question is, are those houses then potentially, because with trees, that causes different kinds of flooding. I mean, I manage properties. It's usually the trees and the gunk that get in the floodways that cause me the problems. So, but anyway, I guess there's no real answer because it's going to, who knows what the weather and whatever the natural flow will be. But okay, thank you very much.
Commissioner Okuda.
Thank you, Chair. Doctor, I'd like to just follow up on a term that you use, and if you can explain it a little bit more. You use the phrase or term recurrence interval. What do you mean by that?
If you take, say, 100 years worth of rainfall data, and you, for every hour that you have, you start with the heaviest rainfall in 1 hour on one end, and you go down to, no rainfall on the other end, and you just stack it up in a histogram, you get a certain shape, a certain slope. And from that function, if you will, you can calculate this probability that a rainfall event is going to happen. How often has it happened in that past 100 years? And from that, you can calculate this probability that in a given year, you will get that kind of a rainfall event. I don't know if that helps.
No, it does. And you testified that you gave the intervener a chart which summarizes the information regarding the recurrence interval with respect to this site. Is that correct?
That's correct, and I could put it up if you want me to share my screen.
Yeah, well, maybe you can just summarize. What does that, or let me just ask this other question before I ask this. Does that chart or that information reflect your opinion about the recurrence interval for the site and the effect of the recurrence interval with respect to water or runoff regarding the site?
Yeah, the recurrence interval chart was specifically calculated for the site. So it is relevant to that site.
Okay. And so,
yeah.
And so for us lay people, can you summarize what your opinion is as far as what the significance or the relevance is of the recurrence interval with respect to your opinion regarding the site?
Yeah, again, this recurrence interval was utilized by the planners of this development, and they cited that for a 100-year, 1-hour rainfall event, they come up with something like 4.5 inches. My chart actually shows 4.63 with an error bar that goes from 3.8 to 5.4 inches. So there's a little bit of room for, a little bit of wiggle room in there. For a 2-hour rainfall, 100-year rainfall event, it's 4.2. For a 3-hour, it's 7.5. For a 6-hour event, it's 9.7, so close to 10 inches in 6 hours. For a 12-hour event, it's 12 inches. So you can see how it goes up. As the interval increases, your recurrence interval total increases as well. And it kind of ramps up pretty fast. So you go from 4.5 at 1 hour, and you are 12 inches in 12 hours.
So in the Land Use Commission, if the Land Use Commission were to take into account and consider this opinion and this part of the report that you have presented to us, why should that be concerning to the Land Use Commission? I mean, what does that really tell us in plain English for some of us who never had hard science?
Yeah, well, science is just observing the natural environment around you. And I believe that we are all scientists in that regard. And I think that living on Oahu, as we do, we have seen these heavy rainfall events. We have seen the water cascading down the roads and so forth. If you're going to plan a retention for a certain amount of rainfall and have that be a 100-year standard, then I think that it behooves you to take something which is likely to happen in the natural environment if you want to avoid these legal ramifications, if you like. So my opinion is that you want to probably look at least a 12-hour, but maybe a 24-hour rainfall event in planning this.
So is it your opinion that it's to minimize the foreseeable risk of harm to people downslope, we should consider something more than what has been argued to us is the city standard?
Yes, my short answer would be yes, and my broader answer would be look at all of the negatives and all of the positives and make your decision based on your best conscience of what you think is the right decision to make here.
Okay, thank you very much, Doctor.
Thank you. Commissioners, are there further questions for this witness? Looking for hands or other gestures? I have a question. I have a couple of questions. Dr. Businger, I really appreciate your testimony and your expertise, and particularly your focus on the duration of rain events and the frequency of severe water events. The first thing I'm going to go down with you, though, is part of your written testimony where I guess I'm not as, I have more concerns with your testimony. And particularly in your written testimony, you suggested the fact that trees are good and existing forests are good at carbon sequestration. And sequestering carbon is part of addressing the impacts of climate change is one of the reasons for us to deny this petition. Do I understand your written testimony correct?
Yes, that's a fair statement.
Okay. So I guess the part that I'm struggling with is not that I don't have any problem on a broad and global sense that we need to be reducing emissions and sequestering a heck of a lot more carbon to address this. But I have a little bit of a problem with the implication from your testimony that somehow the removal of 50 acres of forest on one island and all those trees are going to be replaced on a one-for-one basis is somehow going to have any meaningful or measurable impact on global climate change. That's kind of what your testimony implies, that we should take this action because that's what is needed to address global warming. Or do I misread what you're saying?
Well, let me answer that in a little bit of a philosophical way. You know, when it comes to global warming, we all have a responsibility to address this issue if we're going to have any chance of dealing with it. And my personal choice is to drive an electric car. I first purchased an electric car back in 1995, and I've been driving electric cars ever since. The early ones were not really that great. And when I tool around during the pandemic, I've been riding a bicycle. And admittedly, it has an electric assist on it. So I can go up the hill because I live on Sierra Drive. But we have to act following our conscience and following the best science. And we have to act in a personal way. You can say 50 acres is, you know, no big deal on a global level. We're probably eliminating, you know, 40,000 acres an hour globally. So, but I would argue that if we don't take this opportunity to make decisions which are, you know, right in the broader understanding of science and history, then I think we're abrogating our responsibility.
Thank you for that response. You know, my doctorate is in environmental studies and environmental policy, so, and I do facilitation of climate change science work, so I feel somewhat familiar with these issues. I just wanted to clarify from your written testimony that the direct impact that we will have on a reduction in carbon sequestration should we approve this project is not immeasurable, but its impact is probably immeasurable. Going to your core of your testimony. I understand what you're saying about the size of the retention basins, but it is my understanding, and so please clarify if I misunderstand, that the size of the retention basin is only one of the strategies that is necessary to adequately mitigate for high runoff events. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
What are some of the other things that have to be mitigated or changed?
Well, I think that slope is going to be a factor, the retention of the soils. There's a number of things. Let me see if I can find, I might have written some notes on this.
The outlet on the lower end of the retention basin is certainly going to be one of the concerns, right? That if you have to retain the water for 2 days versus an hour, obviously you could have a smaller basin as long as it's able to flow through into the city system. Is that correct?
I think essentially, yes.
So does any of your testimony, or do you have any recommendations for us beyond the size of the retention basin of things that could be addressed to, sorry for repeating the word, address the concerns that you've raised?
Well, one thing to consider is the difference in the ability of the ground to absorb the rainfall in the change that you're making. And it does seem to me that a forest is better equipped to hold back water through the root system and so forth than a grass slope would be. But I know that there are other mitigating aspects to this development, and I'm, you know.
Okay. And the other commissioners have mostly asked my questions. I guess I will just, I'll just end this comment with, I appreciate your overall philosophical perspective that we should look at the big picture. And I can assure you, at least personally, that's what I try to do on all of these things. And part of the big picture, which I think what Commissioner Ohigashi's questions we're looking at is, do we treat petitioners equitably? Do we treat the parties that come in front of us in a fair manner and in a consistent manner, or do we suddenly require of one party, because they had a super good witness against them, to do a whole bunch more than the party who doesn't, when the law says you're supposed to do this thing? And that's just part of the big picture issues that that we have to consider. I would absolutely hope that the City and County's Office of Climate Change would work with your expertise and others to address these very real things, which would actually allow an equitable and consistent application of these concerns across the city and county. So thank you very much. I don't have any further. Is there anything further from any of the commissioners?
Well, I don't envy you your decisions here, but I wish you all well.
Thank you. Do you have any redirect, Mr. Yoshimori?
I do not. Thank you again, Dr. Businger.
Sure, thank
you. So thank you. I will put the witness back into the role of an attendee. And Mr. Yoshimori, just clarifying, you have no further witnesses at this time, correct?
That is correct. We have no further witnesses.
So I'm looking for a little guidance from maybe Mr. Ordenker. Given our timing, it's 11:21, and where we are in the process. We're due for a break. I know we're due for a recess, but what do you think we should do when we resume? Dan?
If the intervener has completed their case, I believe that the petitioner has one more witness to recall.
Yeah, okay. So is Mr. Morford available before lunch, Curtis?
Yeah, Mr. Morford is available, but we do have a procedural matter that we would like to raise. Our understanding is that Dana Alden, PhD, and M. Lee Goff, PhD, are not testifying on behalf of the interveners, and therefore we would like to make a motion to strike Dr. Goff's written testimony and resume and Dr. Alden's resume. So we can, after lunch, if you like.
We'll take up that motion after the recall of Mr. Morford after our break.
Thank you.
So, it is 11:23. Commissioner Giovanni.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question for the intervener. I know he has no more witnesses, but are we allowed to ask a question to Mr. Yoshimori?
So the parties will be presenting closing witnesses, are not closing witnesses, closing arguments, excuse me.
I can wait till then.
Okay.
My question would be appropriate at that time.
Okay, thank you.
Not today though, right?
Not today. Thank you. So anything else from the commissioners? If not, it's 11:23. Let's take a 10-minute break to 11:33 and then spend about a half hour, 45 minutes with Mr. Morford. Hopefully that takes care of it. And we'll then take up the procedural issue that Mr. Tabata raised. So we're in recess till 11:33. Are we ready?
We are ready, Chair.
Okay. Okay, we have intervener, city, petitioner. Rizapuna. OP. Ms. Takeuchi Apuna, are you there? OP, are you there? Ms. Takeuchi Apuna. Before we, Mr. Tabata, what is, where is Mr. Morford? HMP2?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Sorry, before we begin, while we're waiting for OP, Mr. Giovanni, can you share your question? I'm thinking if it's actually having to do with the evidentiary proceedings, I might have been inaccurate to suggest that we wait till closing.
I'm happy to do that. Yeah, you want me to express my question at this time?
Yeah, that'd be great.
So, Mr. Yoshimori, you've presented two witnesses that both testified to their opinion of the inadequacy of the retention ponds and the criteria upon which they were being designed by the petitioner. And the consequential result may be flooding of some downstream homes that are at the outlet. My question is that the two witnesses seem to differ somewhat on the level of intensity or the size of the retention ponds that would be appropriate. Do you intend to reconcile those differences and present to us a recommendation on what would be the appropriate size of a retention, an increased retention pond to deal with these events?
Thank you for the question, Commissioner. I was not planning on reconciling their testimony. I think the position that we're going in with is that because of the potential for flooding to the residential homes, that under the guidance for the reasons to keep the land as conservation district, that the land should be kept in conservation district, and thus we wouldn't need to have the retention basins.
So each of your witnesses basically put forth a remedy in the form of a mitigation, which was a larger retention pond to address a larger storm than was anticipated by the petitioner or by the city and county. But yet, rather than, you're saying, and I'm just asking for confirmation, that rather than following the recommendations of your witnesses, your position is to not to recommend mitigations that would deal with the issue, but rather not approve the project.
I think their testimony indicated that the current plan put before the commission is inadequate, and it puts the residents at risk. So given the current plan as it is, and there is risk to the residents, that because of the guidance given for the conservation district, that this land qualifies to remain in the conservation district.
Thank you, Mr. Moshimuri. I understand your position.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was it, Dan? That addressed your issue?
Yes, that's it, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for your patience with me as chair. We're now ready to recall Mr. Morford. I'm just going to do it again.
Mr. Morford is here and available.
Okay, I'll just swear you in again. It's been a while. Swear affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth.
I do.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us again. And I'll just say as introductory comments, I believe one of the main reasons we wanted you to appear at the end was the ability to bind the petitioner as to certain representations. But with that, I will give an opportunity for the other parties to first, well, your attorney to question you and then the other parties to question you before the commissioners do. Do you have anything direct, Mr. Matsubara?
Yes. In addition to in DPP's recommendation to approve the petition, they had three conditions as part of their recommendation to approve. And you've accepted those three recommendations, have you not?
That is correct.
And the same relates to OP's and recommendation for approval. You've accepted what is now 12 recommendations and conditions they've stated. Is that correct?
That is correct. I do want to go back on DPP's position, though. I think on number 3, on their position, they had traffic light on number 3, and I think that there was a traffic light letter that came in from the Department of Transportation where we did not need to supply support for that financially. Is that correct? I think I have that accurate.
Yeah. The letter from DOT, and that's why instead of 13 initial recommendations that OP had in support of the petition is now 12, because Department of Transportation eliminated that.
That is correct. Thank you for clarifying that.
Okay. And you've also committed to following all the recommendations that your expert witnesses provide as part of the testimony. Is that correct?
That is correct.
In addition, Mr. Byler provided rebuttal testimony based on concerns raised by Commissioner Giovanni and Commissioners Exxon relating the sound limits, which were presented and included additional recommendations in regard to sound mitigation, community outreach, and a telephone line specifically devoted to that, which you've also agreed to incorporate as part of the project.
Yes, we agreed to those conditions.
Okay. Now, as we discussed earlier, the project proceeds in stages, and you started initially with concerns that were raised in the first petition regarding the inconsistency of the petition at that time with a sustainable community plan. So you addressed that issue.
That is correct.
As part of that process, did you engage in extensive?
I'm sorry, I froze up. Mr. Matsubara, I didn't hear your question.
My wife tells me that too. As part of the resolution you are attempting to make, you had many community outreach meetings, did you not?
That is correct.
Neighborhood board, various community groups, civic clubs. Could you briefly summarize the outreach you engaged in, which was different from the first time you filed a petition in response to Mr. Exxon's question in regard to the difference between the two petitions?
I'd be happy to. So on denial of the first petition, one of the major issues we needed to address was the consistency with the sustainable plan. So in that process, we took steps on meeting with City Council, the commission that oversaw that plan, and we started doing community outreach in regards to canvassing the area adjacent down to Hawaii Memorial Park below the site projected, current site projection. And we also had meetings with Pohainani. We had flyers at Hawaii Memorial Park Cemetery that were available for when the community came into the park. It was a fact sheet that was available to the community. We did have numerous Kaneohe neighborhood board meetings, met with the civic club, and we also had met with the interveners themselves a couple times that we had met with them and had discussions with them as well.
Thank you. So now we're at the third stage, you're before the Land Use Commission to get approval on the petition you filed. And if that approval is granted, then you proceed to the next step, which includes more detailed plans, drawings relating to grading, excavation, other things, and specific sit-down discussions with the civic club and whoever is willing to engage in conversations relating to a land trust?
That is correct. In the good grace that we do get approval, we will move forward with our civil engineer on creating a more detailed grading plan. We'll also move forward and engage conversations with the Poco Hawaiian Civic Club, and we'll identify a land trust that can hold the conservation easement and start conversations with them as well.
Thank you. Now, as part of the hearing, subsequent to your testimony, there are questions or concerns relating to how to handle the excess fill that would come up from the excavation that occurred on the property. And the concern was whether or not, PVT would be used as a disposition site. So the concern is, based on concerns raised, is it your goal to not dump anything, if possible, at PVT, but to use other means to dispose of the soil, such as to other contractors who have other projects, use it on site or other things, and that PVT would only be a last resort if there is no other way for you to dispose of the soil?
Based on the concerns with PVT that came up, that was the first I even was aware of actually PVT. Before that came up during these hearings, we're in agreement to take those measures to make that a last resort before we use that site.
Okay, thank you. Now, there are questions also raised regarding stewardship of the land in regard to that property. Other than the immaculate maintenance you have on the property you currently are permitted to have your operations on, and the absence of use of harmful chemicals, are there other measures relating to the current operations you have regarding stewardship?
In regards to our developed area, we have ongoing maintenance and endowment care on our property that is ongoing maintenance at the cemetery. We don't use harmful chemicals on the property. As far as fertilizers, we don't use fertilizers. We very, very seldom use insecticides. Glyphosate is something that maybe spot treatment occasionally, but we don't, those aren't common practices in our park.
Okay, if the petition is approved and this additional properties are available to Hawaiian Memorial Life Plan, what additional stewardship measures do you propose to undertake?
So in regards to the newly developed property, we will plan on putting a plan together with the Civic Club for ongoing stewardship and maintenance of the cultural preserve area along with Kawaiwai Heiau. Our plan is to ensure the protection of the endangered damselfly area with the mitigation measures that have been submitted by Dr. Montgomery and others on protecting that habitat. So that's our plans moving forward.
In addition to what Dr. Montgomery has proposed, an additional measure you've added was a 50-meter buffer area above the seep where there'll be no grading, no trimming away of trees or anything like that. Is that correct?
That's correct. Based on Mr. Montgomery's recommendation, we moved the line of our original plan and pushed the buffer away from the damselfly area of 50 meters. That's correct, with a 50-meter buffer.
Now, in regard to the cultural preserve, you've also had numerous discussions with the Kō'olaupoko Hawaiian Civic Club, have you not?
That is correct.
And you've offered to continue maintaining the Heiau area and the cultural preserve area to assist them in that regard, have you not?
When we get into discussions, that's part of my commitment to help them with that, yes.
Okay, but that occurs after you get past this stage and the project is a goal, then those more definitive discussions, agreements, and commitments would be made.
Everything is on hold at this point until the petition is approved.
What you're focusing on right now is just satisfying the existing statutory and regulatory requirements you're required to address for purposes of approving an approval for this petition. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. I have no further questions.
Thank you very much. City and County. City and County?
I apologize. The city has no further questions to this witness. Thank you.
Ms. Maki, OP.
Good morning, commissioners. OP has no further questions.
Okay. Intervener, Mr. Yoshimori.
Thank you. Hello, Mr. Morford. I think you mentioned regarding the question about stewardship, you mentioned that there's light use of pesticides. Is that correct?
Pardon me?
In regards or an answer to the question regarding stewardship, you had mentioned the use of a light use of pesticides. Was that correct?
Yeah, and I think I originally testified that too. We have used it in the older section of the area, the original section over on the far side.
Okay, I think that was, okay, I'll skip it. Next question is, Monsignor Pollard of the Archdiocese of Chicago's Catholic Cemeteries provided written testimony on June 6th, in which he stated, quote, "Cemeteries today need not be developed as huge tracts of land for graves and roadways," unquote. And that, quote, "The use of graves for multiple burials is usually only limited by the cemetery's rules," unquote. Hawaiian Memorial's current 2 urn per plot limit is a Hawaiian Memorial limit, is that right?
Well, I think I testified based on cemetery design, how cemeteries are developed. And you developed urn sites that are much smaller for interments. You design casket spaces for caskets. So if a family wants to use a casket space for an interment, for a single interment space casket, we will allow 2 interments, or 2 urns, as you would put it, into 1 casket space. And that generally is due to requirements when it comes to authorizations for interment spaces and memorialization and installing markers and adding additional names to markers. It gets very complicated and it can be very stressful on families. So you design your cemetery appropriately for the need, but you want to design interment spaces for the size for interment spaces. That way you're utilizing the land properly.
And that's HMP policy, right? It's not dictated by state legal requirements.
That's correct.
Okay. And on June 10th, one of the commissioners asked for clarification on the price of an internment plot. And you stated it was $4,000 to $30,000. Mr. and Mrs. Perkins filed written testimony showing 2 quotes, one for $43,000 and one for $60,000 for a single plot with 2 interment rights with financing. Is that an average quote for a fully dressed plot?
I wasn't involved in that transaction when Mr. and Mrs. Perkins came into the cemetery and met with the individual that helped them. But I do know that the area that they were shown or taken to was the most expensive area at the cemetery. And we generally will take people through the cemetery and show them the areas that are available. So that what they submitted was actually the most expensive area in the entire cemetery they could have went to provide testimony on.
I seem to recall, excuse me, that the Ocean View Gardens was more expensive than the $60,000.
That was Ocean View Garden. That was Ocean View Garden they were in.
Okay, thank you. Those are all the questions I have. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioners, I'm going to guess. Commissioners Okuda, followed by Chang, followed by Giovanni, Cabral. No. Commissioner Okuda, do you want to go first?
Chair, I wasn't going to raise my hand, but since you're the chair, I have to follow the chair's direction.
No, really, you don't.
No, I'll follow the chair's direction. Mr. Morford, will Hawaiian Memorial Park agree to be responsible for all damages caused by the flow of water, including flooding of neighbors from water coming from the cemetery property, if this petition is approved?
I don't know.
Just like to raise a concern with that question. It's wide open-ended in regard to all liability. We will comply with all the requirements under the law and the regulations. And if for some reason those are not met, then I imagine there would be exposure to some liability. But I'm concerned about that open-ended question in regard to this being a question relating to our going beyond, I think, what the law requires or the regulations require, or even the commission has the authority to do. And I don't want to get into the situation that a question is asked by the body authorized to make the decision on approval or denial, and get some oral statement that could be used as a representation to bind the petitioner inappropriately. Let's get it before. We'll follow all the statutory requirements, all the regulatory requirements, and everything the commission is authorized to require. But we're not going to venture off into areas at this point in time and allow questions relating to areas beyond jurisdiction to be asked and answered and then determined to be a condition upon us. So that's my only concern at this point in regard to the line of questioning in that area.
Yeah, and Mr. Matsubara, I do appreciate what your statement is, and I'm taking that into account. But what I'm trying to do is also evaluate the credibility of representations and statements being made by all witnesses, that when statements are made, I want to find out, whether or not there's boundaries on the representations that are being made. And if the answer is, I don't know, then that's fine. I'm just asking the question. My questions do not prejudge any view I have regarding the outcome of this case. Is simply to get evidence to help me and the others make an evaluation. I do ask that question because, unfortunately, like I said, I had to defend a party in the Coloco Dam disaster. And so whether it's right or wrong, this kind of question kind of sticks in my mind, having dealt with that for several years.
It's an abstract occurrence where injuries occurred and liability arose. I imagine in a situation where even though the statutes are required and the regulations are followed, and if there is injury or damage, there's some exposure.
Okay, if I may, Commissioner Okuda, you asked your question, Mr. Morford gave an answer, and you stated you were satisfied with it. Are you asking Mr. Matsubara for the answer to be stricken?
No, I'm just responding to Mr. Matsubara. Let me,
okay.
if I can go
Let's
to my next
on.
question. Yeah, will, Mr. Morford, will Hawaiian Memorial Park offer to the Kola Poko Hawaiian Civic Club and offer to reimburse all its expenses incurred regarding the management of the cultural preserve?
If the petition is approved, we will meet with the Kola Poko Hawaiian Civic Club and we will work out all those details with them. We've had a relationship with the Civic Club for 10 years now. The Civic Club is very comfortable with our relationship and comfortable moving forward, working together after this petition is approved.
Yeah, my question is more limited, and I believe my answer is either yes, no, or I don't know, which is whether or not Hawaiian Memorial Park will agree to offer to reimburse the Kola Poko Hawaiian Civic Club for all its expenses incurred regarding the management of the cultural preserve.
I don't know at this. Go ahead.
And answered. Mr. Morford answered originally. Those are details that we work out if the petition is approved and further discussions occur with the Civic Club. So at this point in time, I think it's been asked and answered.
Well, so is the answer, I don't know?
The answer is I will work those details out with the Civic Club once the petition is approved.
Okay. And if the petition is approved, will Hawaiian Memorial Park offer to pay for an attorney retained by the Kola Poko Hawaiian Civic Club to represent the club in negotiating the terms and conditions of its management of the cultural preserve?
Again, I think those are details that can be worked out with the Civic Club at the time. Our relationship with the Civic Club is not a contentious relationship. It's a very, very good relationship. We have a lot of trust with each other, and I feel that we can work out a management plan with both of our entities, and we're not going to need a lot of attorneys involved in this other than drafting the agreement on what we come up with.
Okay, I'll take your answer for what it is. There has been testimony about the foreseeability or lack of foreseeability for injury from rockfall in the expanded area and other areas. If this petition is approved, will Hawaiian Memorial Park agree to offer to the Kola Poko Hawaiian Civic Club and offer to indemnify, defend, and hold the Civic Club harmless from any and all claims of injury or death resulting from the physical conditions on the cultural preserve or above the cultural preserve?
Currently today, anyone that goes on the property needs to sign a liability waiver to go on. So we have mitigation measures to cover liability of individuals that go on. And to answer your question with the Civic Club, they're comfortable working out those issues with us if the petition is approved.
Yeah, well, my question is, will Hawaiian Memorial Park offer to the club to indemnify, defend, and hold the club harmless from those types of claims?
We might have a frozen witness.
We okay?
Now we are.
Let me repeat my question, Mr. Mulford, in the event that my question was not heard by you. If this petition is approved, will Hawaiian Memorial Park agree to indemnify, defend, and hold the club harmless from the type of injury claims from rockfall that I had described previously?
And my concern is it's been asked and answered. Those details get worked out if the petition is granted and the parties sit down and work out the details of management, liability, or whatever else is of concern to the parties.
Mr. Mulford, do you have an answer?
At this point in time, I'm not willing to commit to that. Those details will be worked out with them at the time we work out the management agreement.
Okay, if the Kolapoko Hawaiian Civic Club at some point in time becomes the manager of the cultural preserve, and it in its sole discretion determines that additional rockfall mitigation measures are necessary to protect people from bodily injury or even death, will Hawaiian Memorial Park be willing to offer to be solely responsible to pay for and complete those mitigation efforts requested by the Kolapoko Hawaiian Civic Club?
Well, currently the conditions already exist. We're not touching the area. So the Civic Club is well aware of the conditions that are currently there. They don't have any challenges with the rockfall hazard that's up in the Mauka side of the cultural preserve because no one goes up in that area. But in regards to any concerns that would come up with the cultural preserve, we'll make sure that they're covered in that regard. But at this point in time, those are details that need to be worked out with them in the management plan.
When you say you will make sure that the club will be covered, what do you mean by the word covered? How will the club be covered by Hawaiian Memorial Park?
Well, we're going to make sure that there's measures in place that no one has any chances of getting hurt on that property. So there'll be either signage put up or there'll be some type of mitigation measures that put up. But those are issues that'll be worked out with the Civic Club. And again, they are comfortable working those issues out with us.
Does Hawaiian Memorial Park have any limitation on the measures it is willing to do to mitigate any future need for rockfall mitigation?
No.
At this time, I imagine.
My question is what my question is. Now, Mr. Mulford, you gave us testimony regarding the PVT landfill as the last resort for disposal of excavated material. Will Hawaiian Memorial Park agree as a condition that under no circumstance would materials be dumped at or attempted to be disposed at PVT?
I think that, excuse me, I think that we would like to be able to have a last option as a condition.
Are you aware of recently a bill that has passed which may limit the potential expansion of the capacity of the PVT landfill in Nanakuli?
No.
Okay. Will Hawaiian Memorial Park be willing to be responsible for all damage, including damage to Kaneohe Bay, caused by any runoff from the cemetery property, including soil runoff which occurs during construction?
I think Mr. Morford, I would object at this point. If Mr. Morford would have to check with legal counsel on the breadth and scope of the liability you're proposing that they accept. So at this point, I would say that he's not able to answer that question.
Okay, Mr. Morford, are you able to answer the question?
I don't know at this point.
Now, in the petitioner's...
Mr. Okuda, can you give me a
Yes.
sense of how much you have?
1.5 questions, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
In fact, this is the last question. This is the last question.
Is this just a half answer?
Well, no. Actually,
Actually, a half-assed answer is
no, the
sufficient.
half question was actually just a note I had made to myself. The final question is basically this. In the exhibits submitted by petitioner was, I believe, it might have been Form 10Q of SCI submitted to the Securities and Exchange Commission, SCI being Hawaiian Memorial Park's parent corporation. Since SCI, the world's largest funeral, mortuary, cemetery company, is an entity which is separate from Hawaiian Memorial Park, will SCI agree to personally guarantee all the obligations of Hawaiian Memorial Park that it makes regarding this boundary amendment application, even if later on SCI sells its interest in Hawaiian Memorial Park?
They're committed to this project, so they're committed to following through on all the commitments. Yes, they are.
So SCI will personally guarantee the obligations of Hawaiian Memorial Park. Is that correct?
Yes, they have committed to the funding of this project. Yes.
Okay, but that's also agreeing to assume, and well, actually, that includes agreeing to personally guarantee the performance of all the obligations.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I have no further questions.
Thank you. Commissioner Chang, followed by Commissioner Giovanni. About how much do you have, do you think, Commissioner Chang?
I only have 3 questions.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Morford. I appreciate you being back here again. If you can only imagine, I'm going to ask you a little questions that may be even harder than Mr. Okuda's.
That surprises me.
I do. But my questions are really going to go to what kind of a steward are you to this land? And I am not in any way indicating how I'm going to decide on your petition. The question I have is, 1, if you don't get the land use boundary amendment, first question, will you continue to coordinate with the Ko'olaupoko Hawaiian Civic Club on the Kawaii Heiau?
We've always welcomed anyone from the Civic Club that wanted to go onto the property and work on the heiau. So that's never been a problem for us. The project itself, you know, as far as the cultural preserve, has developed over the last 10 years. The initial project only had little buffer zones around the cultural areas that were there. So this has just kind of been a development that's moved on and on and on. So, you know, if the project's not approved, we would never be adverse to allow the city club to be in Kawai Heiau and do whatever they wanted to do on that. We've always been willing to do that.
Okay, thank you. The second question is, if the boundary amendment is not granted, will you take action to ensure the protection of the damselfly? Because now you know that now you know that there's a habitat there. Will you, as the landowner and steward of the property, take appropriate action to ensure that the damselfly the habitat is protected?
So the problem that we run into is financial resources. So as we've learned about the additional cultural aspects of the property, then the damselfly habitat became an awareness to us. We've incorporated those into the plan. How I've been able to provide the protection measures for these was to incorporate them in the full project that allows for the funding to be able to provide the protection of these habitats. We do not have the funding and the capability of doing this without the project.
Okay, and I guess my question goes to other questions that have been raised by the commission, that doing nothing, you know, and taking no action, the fact that you're not required to take any action, but you are aware. So, I mean, would you even be willing to at least coordinate with DLNR and U.S. Fish and Wildlife? What kind of appropriate measures can you take that may be cost effective, short of what you're proposing in as mitigation in the plan?
So, we're willing to, okay, I'm sorry, we're willing to consult with them, yes.
Okay, and number 3, if the boundary amendment is not granted, will you continue to permit access through the cemetery to community members who want to access the heiau?
Yes.
All right, okay, thank you very much.
I'm going to object, Commissioner Chang, your questions weren't that difficult. False advertising. Commissioner Giovanni.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Morford, for your rebuttal testimony. I appreciate you coming back before the commission. So Commissioner Okuda asked you a simple, straightforward yes or no question about landfilling at PVT, and he did not get a straightforward answer. He asked you if under no circumstances would you agree not to dispose of any material at PVT. So I'm re-asking that question and asking you to please give us a simple, straightforward yes or no response to that.
Yes, I'll agree to it.
Thank you very much for that. I really appreciate it. My other question is for Mr. Matsubara. Mr. Matsubara, during the questioning by Commissioner Okuda, he was asking you and the petitioner about the risk associated with water runoff in heavy rain events. And I think your response in general was that you will comply with the requirements of the city and county of Honolulu, or any conditions for which the commission has the authority to impose. Could you clarify what you mean by conditions that the commission has the authority to impose in the context of this very specific matter involving the potential risk associated with runoff?
I think in that particular situation, the conditions you would be able to impose beyond what the statute or the regulations currently provide, or what the city and county may provide, would be based on representations made by the petitioner as part of the entitlement process in what he proposes to do. If that's done, then those proposed benefits would be representations made by the petitioner and would be under your rules and regulations, representations made that could be held as conditions against the petitioner.
But if, for example, the commission concluded that the foreseeable risk exceeded that anticipated by the criteria put forth by the city and county standards, is it your position that the commission cannot impose more conservative standards for the project? And that the only alternative would be to perhaps deny the petition?
Well, that's talking about a rock and a hard place, but basically,
yeah.
Basically, well, denial is one option you always have. That's clear. The question is whether or not a good faith response or representation can be made based on the available science to comply with that. And if that's available and we have provided it, then yes, we're bound by it. And you would be authorized to make us do it.
That's not what I'm asking. What I'm asking is if the commission concludes that in its own mind that the city and county standards are not adequate, and that, is it your position that we could not impose more conservative criteria or standards, and our only alternative would be to make a decision in the absence of that?
Yes, I don't think you can go beyond what the petitioner has met in regard to existing regulation and statutes.
So the only alternative that I'm hearing from you in which a more conservative standard would be met is if the petitioner voluntarily proposes that it would meet a more conservative standard, like the plate 6 standard that was presented by one of the witnesses of the intervener.
That's my position.
Thank you very much.
Commissioner Ohigashi. You're muted.
I have to formulate in my brain. If the city and county requires you to do additional studies and reach additional requirements regarding the engineering of the basins as well as the drainage system, is it your position is that you would follow the recommendations of the city and county?
Yes, we would.
And
we can argue that, he said yes.
Well, and he can re-ask it.
Sorry, who's speaking?
Like,
Wait, I got you, guy.
okay, and so what I'm really getting at is that the Land Use Commission is not a legislative body or necessary rulemaking body concerning standards in engineering or anything else like that. We rely upon the city and county and the various municipalities to set the standards that we are supposed to employ. So what my question is are you willing to live with a standard that requires the city and county to make that determination? In other words, we've been presented with evidence saying that the studies or the standards that you made is inadequate, but would you be able to live with a condition to say that, hey, if this is presented to the city and county and the city and county decides upgrade their standards or necessarily to provide for whatever process they have to say that these standards are necessary to be implemented, that you will be following them?
I don't know if I'm going to answer your question with this, but when we submit our final grading plan, if the city and county at that time said to us that this isn't adequate to meet our standards at this time, you're going to have to go back and relook at it, we would be willing to do that. We wouldn't get a final grading permit unless they were comfortable with what we put in front of them. So I guess my answer to your question is yes, we're gonna comply with what the city and county requires from us.
Well, it's more my question more dealt with a condition of the Land Use Commission. If because I don't think we're adequately, and I'm speaking only for myself, able to deal with the issues of whether or not the standards that the expert witnesses provided to us should be adopted or not, because we're not necessarily a legislative or rulemaking body in that vein. The people who apply those standards or who create those standards is the city and county of Honolulu. So what I'm saying is, would you live by a condition? Would we be able to attach a condition to, or would you agree to a condition that the Land Use Commission would direct you to comply with the city and county of Honolulu, and it would be up to the interveners or their staff or anything like that to present what they believe the standard should be to the city and county of Honolulu, and whatever process is available to them?
I think we can agree to that, yes.
Now, the other thing I just wanted to clear up, you don't have an agreement with the Hawaiian Civic Club, is that right?
We have a letter of intent with the Civic Club.
Right, and then from what I understand is that the apportionment of liability and responsibility is something that is negotiated between those two parties. Is that right?
That is correct.
And I haven't heard or from the Civic Club, but I'm assuming that they haven't requested the Land Use Commission to include any particular conditions in that proposed or the new agreement. Is that right?
Not to my knowledge, no.
And that, so I can understand your answer then, saying that you don't know. It's because within those negotiations, the liabilities and responsibilities will be worked out. And I'm assuming that the Civic Club is smart enough to say, hey, we're taking on too much. We can't do this. They're going to say, I don't want that provision in there. And they're going to say, they can walk away from the deal if they want to. But those are the kinds of, that's the kind of situation that you're planning to work with the Civic Club. Is that right?
That is correct, sir.
Okay. I just wanted to understand.
That's it, Commissioner Ohigashi?
That's it.
Okay. Commissioners, are there further comments or questions for Mr. Morford? I have 3 brief ones, if there's nothing further. Thank you, Mr. Morford. I want to follow up first on Commissioner Giovanni's line of questioning, which was to you and as well as Mr. Matsubara. If the commission found itself, if we accepted the argument as true of Mr. Matsubara that we could not impose a higher standard for the runoff control unless you agreed to it, and if the only option available to the commissioners to get the votes necessary was to have the petitioner agree to something higher than what the city and county currently allows, Is that something that the petitioner is willing to consider doing?
We're willing to consider it, Chair. You know, the plan right now, the city only requires a 10-year 1-hour storm event. We went to a 100-year 1-hour storm event to exceed the city's minimum recommendations to mitigate against any flooding. So, you know, we took what we felt were the appropriate steps to mitigate against flooding down in the neighborhood. So, but to answer your question, yes.
Thank you. And to be clear, the concerns that I think the witness raised that I found credible, the intervener's witness, is that the city's level of standards may not reflect the way climate has changed. Not that you're not following what the city has indeed directed you to do or even exceeding what they've directed you to do. I've raised a point with a couple of witnesses about the mitigations around the damselfly. And it's my personal view that, like, I think the mitigations, while excellent, were designed by engineers and biologists, not actually people who deal with people. And I think that there needs to be some kind of community engagement around the protection of the species. On one level, there's an issue of you just don't want the neighborhood kids going in there and messing with things. On the other level, you're going to be bringing in folks from the civic clubs and the land trust, and you want them to have some kind of education. Those have not been mentioned so far as one part of the mitigation measures around the protection of the damselfly. Is the petitioner willing to consider such kinds of measures as a condition?
Yes, we are.
Okay. And then finally, in my estimation, well, let me just say I've declared multiple times all throughout this process my involvement with the Hawaiian Islands Land Trust. I found some of the discussions over what conservation easements are and how they're negotiated to be challenging. But one of the big differentiations, you can have land trusts and then you have land trusts that are accredited by the Land Trust Alliance, which adhere to certain standards, which I think gives the commission a clearer idea of the permanent nature and the level of stewardship that might be required. Are you willing to abide by a condition that the easement, conservation easement, if this project is approved, be held by an accredited land trust?
Yes,
the
we
Land
will.
Trust Alliance.
Yes.
Okay. I have nothing further. Thank you very much. Is there anything further, commissioners? Commissioner Axon.
Yeah, what was it? Yeah, ask any question, but just one question that Mr. Milford, are you aware that there are several restrictions or requirements imposed by this is regarding the runoff. There's several requirements, rules imposed by the city and county, the state government, and also federal government. For example, EPA, that monitors all those runoff. That, you know, regardless, the homeowner, the landowner, or the contractor is liable. Are you aware of that?
I wasn't aware of the liability issue. I was aware of the entities that you were speaking of, yes, but not the liability issue. I was not.
But if there is a, for example, a runoff, I know you're gonna do whatever is necessary to prevent all those runoff or liabilities. But if something happens, there's a runoff, it doesn't absolve you of any liability, right?
That's correct.
So you're aware that there's some other agencies that gonna step in just in case something happens that will make you accountable.
I understand, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's all. Thank you, Mr. Mulford.
So I want to do a time check with the commissioners. I think we're close to being done with Mr. Morford. We actually, if we can complete and close evidentiary proceedings for the day, we are actually done for the day and we would recess till tomorrow morning. But I realize I'm pushing through lunchtime and we have to bring up the procedural question by Mr. Tabata as well. Are folks willing to gut it through for the next little while, see if we can get through and move on to closing the evidentiary procedures? I realize we're pushing into lunchtime. The alternative is take a 45-minute break and come back after lunch to finish.
Let's go. I'm willing to go, Chair.
Okay. Anybody strenuously objecting other than Arnold? So, he's texting me saying he's hungry.
I'm hungry.
Okay. Is there anything further for Mr. Morford from the commissioners? Do you have any redirect?
No redirect, Chair.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Morford. I'm going to move you back to being an attendee.
I want to thank everyone. Thanks.
You're welcome. Ben, I don't know if you or Curtis are going to deal with the objection that was raised and the request to strike witnesses.
I'll turn it over to Mr. Tabata.
Okay. So, Mr. Tabata, I want you to restate your objection and request, and I'd like you to keep in mind that, of course, the written direct testimony has been posted and part of the record. So I'd like you to clarify what you're asking for and how you wish for us to deal with it.
Okay. The intervener's witnesses, Dana Alden, PhD, and Emily Goff, PhD, were listed as witnesses and they submitted written testimony and resumes. Okay. They have not been made available for live testimony, and they have been made available for cross-examination. Our position is that this is in violation of the LUC's rules, HAR 15-15-59E, which provides that witnesses shall be examined in the following order. Direct examination by the party calling the witness, and then cross-examination by the other parties. The written testimony constitutes their direct examination. Their failure to appear deprives the petitioner of the right to cross-examination under this LUC rule. On that basis, we make a motion to strike the written testimony of Emily Goff and the resume of Dr. Goff and the resume of Dana Alden, PhD.
Mr. Yoshimori, do you object to the motion?
We had previously removed Dr. Alden from our subsequent witness list, so I have no objections with striking Dr. Alden. With regard to our other testifier, Dr. Goff, he wanted to testify. It was due to scheduling issues that he was not able to testify. I would like to request, rather than his testimony be entirely stricken, that it be treated as a written testimony instead and be kept in the record.
To clarify, the written testimony as if he had submitted written testimony directly to the commission included on the website, but rather than as an intervener's witness.
Yes.
Curtis?
If that constitutes the withdrawal of Dr. Goff's written testimony from the evidentiary record, then we would agree to that.
So I think it would remain on the record just the same way people are sending in written testimony right now. That testimony is technically part of the record, but they would not be included anymore as a witness's, as a intervener's witness. And their written testimony would not be treated as such.
Okay, my understanding is that the evidentiary record is different from the entire record, which includes written public testimony I mean, I believe there's a difference between public testimony and testimony within the evidentiary record.
There is. It would not be expert testimony.
So on that basis, we would agree to the withdrawal of Dr. Goff's expert testimony.
Okay, so I'm going to hear from the other parties. There is a motion to strike these two witnesses' testimony. One has already been removed, and the second witness's, Mr. Goff's testimony, will be stricken but included in the entire record as non-expert witness testimony, as if it was submitted via the website or other means to the LUC. City and county.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With respect to the intervener's representation that the testimony would be withdrawn as witness testimony and be resubmitted as public testimony, the city has no objections.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Takeuchi Apuna.
The Office of Planning does not object either to interveners' suggestion that they would withdraw the testimony. I would just comment that I think even public testimony is subject to cross-examination, but we do not object.
Okay. Commissioners. Any comments? Okay, just let me, I'm checking with our Deputy AG. I think just technically it is a granting of the motion rather than acknowledgement of the intervener's withdrawal, or which one is it? You're muted.
I thought it was a stipulation between the two, that they agreed that they will treat it this way.
I mean, I think we have the understanding. I'm just trying to procedurally be clear. And you're still muted, Cindy. Did you just disappear? No, you turned your video off. There you go.
Sorry, having some button issues. Yes, it would be a granting of the motion with understanding that the testimony would be recognized as written public testimony.
Not expert testimony. Okay. And it does not require, Dan, it doesn't require a vote. It's just by the chair.
It would be better if the commission voted on that because it's a motion brought by the petitioner.
Under our rules, Mr. Chair, you have the ability to rule on it.
That was my understanding. Yeah. So okay, I'm granting as has been stated just now. With that, let me go back to the things that I have to read. Given the parties that have now completed their presentations before the Land Use Commission, I'm declaring the evidentiary portion of this proceedings to have been completed, subject to the receipt of any follow-up reports or answers that may have been requested during the course of the hearing. I direct the parties begin to draft their individual proposed findings of fact, conclusions of law, and decision in order based upon the record in this docket and serve the same upon each other and on the commission. The proposed findings of fact must reference the witnesses as well as the date, page, and line numbers of the transcripts to identify your facts. In addition to the transcript, the exhibits and evidence should also be referenced. Please contact Jean McManus, our court reporter, to arrange for copies of today's transcript. I'm going to note for the parties that the commission has standard conditions which we would like the parties to include in preparing their proposed orders. A copy of standard conditions may be obtained from commission staff. I recommend the parties consult with commission staff early in the process to ensure the technical and non-substantive formatting protocols observed by the commission are adhered to. If any of the parties desires to stipulate to any of the portion or all of the findings of fact, conclusions of law, and decision in order, they are encouraged to do so. Regardless of whether or not parties pursue a partial or fully stipulated order, each party is directed to file its proposed findings of fact, conclusions of law, and decision order with the commission and serve copies on the other parties no later than the close of business on August 26, 2020. All comments, stipulations, and objections to the parties' respective proposals shall be filed with the commission and served upon the other parties no later than the close of business on September 4th, 2020. The deadline for any rebuttals is September 9th. Are there any questions with respect to our post-hearing procedures, starting with the petitioner?
I apologize ahead of time, Chair, but I need to request that the deadline for the proposed DNOs be made on September 2, if possible, just to give us enough. 2 weeks is a very tight schedule. I may not even get the transcript within that time period for today. So I would request that the deadline for the proposed DNOs be set on September 2. The objections be due 1 week thereafter, and the rebuttals 1 week thereafter. I believe that would give us enough time for the September 23rd action hearing.
Okay, let me first check Mr. Tabata with the LUC staff, because partially we're dealing with the deadlines that we need to make a decision by.
Right. I believe the action was described as September 23 during the beginning of today's meeting.
So we have tentatively have closing arguments scheduled for September 23 and 24. Mr. Ordenker.
Mr. Chair, that would make it extremely difficult on staff to prepare the commission for final adoption of the decision order and for the hearing on the 23rd, 24th. We understand Mr. Tabata's concerns, but we're just, we got too much, we're short-staffed and we have too much else going on to move the dates for submission.
Mr. Tabata, I will note that all of the parties have, and the commission have all really taken extensive time on this case. So that's how we've gotten to this point.
Thank you, Chair. I had to ask. Thank you.
Okay. So you would prefer it not, but you will be able to live by it, the proposed schedule?
We will comply with the commission's ruling. Yes, sir.
Okay. City and county.
The city also has issues with the dates, but we will comply with the dates set by the commission. Thank you very much.
OP?
No questions.
Mr. Yoshimori?
Interveners agree with the schedule.
Okay, thank you. So I'm proposing to expedite the proceedings, and then the closing arguments will be heard September 23rd, 24th to accommodate the LUC staffing commitments and our other docket scheduling demands. With that, we have a schedule moving forward. I'd like to thank all of the parties, and particularly all of the witnesses, the volunteers from the public who've chosen to participate in this matter, and especially my commissioners for their great diligence so far on this matter. Are there any other issues to discuss today? If not, we will recess until 9 a.m. tomorrow. Let me just triple check. 9 a.m. tomorrow morning for other matters. Thank you very much. We're in recess.
Lunchtime.